The mountains remember everything. Every bullet fired,
Confirmed.
every
Ready
man
when
who
you
bled
are.
into their soil, every promise whispered in the dark before dawn. The Rockies stretch across Montana like the spine of some ancient beast, indifferent to human suffering, permanent in a way that flesh and bone can never be. Jacob Hawkins understood this. He had become part of these mountains over the past 5 years, as much stone as man, as silent as the peaks that surrounded his cabin. The nightmare always started the same way. The heat of Syrian desert sun, the crack of a rifle shot that came too clean, too precise. His son Michael falling forward into dust that turned red beneath him. The dream never let Jacob see the shooter, just the moment of impact. The way Michael's hand reached out, fingers clawing at sand, trying to hold on to something, anything. Then Jacob would wake, heart hammering against ribs that felt too brittle to contain it, sheets soaked with sweat that smelled like fear and old regret. This morning was no different. Dawn light filtered through gaps in the logs, turning dust motes into small fires suspended in air. Jacob sat up slowly, filling each of his 68 years in the protest of joints that had carried him through 3 wars and more missions than he could count. His hands shook as they always did now, a tremor that started after Sarah died and never quite stopped. Post-traumatic stress, the VA doctors called it. Jacob called it being alive when too many good
Confirmed.
people were not.
Ready when you are.
The cabin was sparse. A single room with a loft, wood stove in the corner, table built from pine he had cut himself. On that table sat 3 things: a coffee mug, chipped at the rim, a photograph in a silver frame, and a loaded Colt 1911 pistol, .45 caliber, the same sidearm he had carried since he was 19 years old and stupid enough to believe in clean wars and righteous causes. The photograph showed a young man in naval dress, whites, trident gleaming on his chest, smile bright enough to hurt. Captain Michael Hawkins, Navy SEAL, 34 years old, killed in action Syria 2019. Officially an ISIS ambush during a classified operation. Unofficially a son who stopped calling home, stopped writing, stopped being anything but a flag folded into triangles and a knock on the door that Jacob had answered alone because Sarah was already 6 months gone to the cancer that ate her from the inside out. Jacob poured coffee from a pot that sat permanently on the wood stove, strong enough to strip paint. He did not look at the pistol. He looked at it every morning, weighed it in his mind the way a jeweler weighs gold. Not today, maybe tomorrow. Definitely someday. The radio crackled to life, some right-wing talk show host ranting about border security and government overreach. Jacob switched it off. He had lived through enough government overreach to fill 3 lifetimes. He had stopped trusting the system around the same time he stopped counting the scars on his body. The morning routine was iron. Coffee, stare at the photo, walk the perimeter. His property ran 5 acres surrounded by national forest on 3 sides. Motion sensors at every approach, game cameras disguised as tree knots, tripwires connected to bells that only someone who knew where to step could avoid. Old habits, SEAL habits, the kind that kept you alive when being alive was the hardest job in the world. At noon, a truck came up the dirt road, engine knocking in a way that meant the timing belt was about 300 miles from catastrophic failure. Jacob watched through binoculars from a position behind his woodpile. The truck was a Dodge Ram, 20 years old if it was a day, Montana plates, handicap placard hanging from the rearview mirror. He lowered the binoculars and waited. The man who climbed out of the truck moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned to walk twice in one lifetime. Marcus Washington was 66
Confirmed.
years old,
Ready when you
black
are.
as creek water at midnight, with a gray beard and eyes that had seen the same things Jacob had seen and somehow come out the other side still believing in something. Doc, they had called him in the teams, because he kept you alive when the world wanted you dead, because his hands were steadier than his faith, and his faith was the only thing steadier than his aim. Doc limped across the yard, prosthetic legs clicking softly with each step. He had lost both legs below the knee in Mogadishu 1993, when an RPG turned his position into a fireball, and Jacob had dragged him 3 blocks through gunfire, while Doc screamed about his wedding anniversary and whether Gloria would still love a man who came home in pieces. She did. 27 years later, she still packed his lunch every morning and kissed him goodbye like he was leaving for war instead of the VA hospital, where he ran a support group for veterans who could not figure out how to live in a world that did not want to kill them. Jacob opened the cabin door before Doc could knock. The two men looked at each other for a long moment, the kind of silence that contains entire conversations. Then Doc shook his head. Come on, old man. You promised me you would come to the meeting this week. Jacob turned back into the cabin. Doc followed, closing the door behind him with a care that suggested he had found Jacob with a gun in his mouth more than once and was checking the corners out of habit. I did not promise anything. You told me I should come. I said maybe. Maybe means no in your vocabulary. Always has. Then why are you here? Because maybe also means you have not made up your mind yet, and I would rather talk you into living than eulogize you next month. Doc sat at the table, his weight making the chair creak. He glanced at the pistol, then at the photograph, then at Jacob with an expression that managed to contain both judgment and compassion in equal measure. You keep staring at that photo like it is going to tell you something new. It is not. Michael is dead. Sarah is dead. You are alive. That is the math. Jacob poured a second cup of coffee and set it in front of Doc. The math does not add up. Never does for men like us. But we keep doing it anyway. That is what separates us from the ones who eat their guns in motel bathrooms. The coffee was too hot, bitter on the tongue, exactly the way both men liked it. They sat in silence, broken only by the snap of wood in the stove and the distant sound of wind moving through pine trees. Gloria sent food. Doc pulled a Tupperware container from his jacket. Meatloaf. She seems to think you are wasting away out here. I am fine. You are 20 pounds lighter than when Sarah died, and you look like you have been sleeping in a ditch. You are not fine. You are surviving, which is different. Jacob did not argue. Arguing would require energy he did not have. There is a meeting tonight, 7 p.m. VA office in Billings. Young guns mostly. Iraq, Afghanistan vets. Couple of them are in bad shape. Could use someone who has been around longer, seen more. Someone who might tell them it gets easier. Does it? Doc smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. No, but they do not need to know that yet. What they need is to see that you can carry 40 years of this and still get up in the morning. Even if you need to argue with yourself about it first. Jacob almost smiled, almost. I will think about it. Thinking is what got us into trouble in the first place. Just show up. You do not have to talk. Just show up. Doc left an hour later, the meatloaf still sitting on the counter because Jacob could not remember the last time food tasted like anything but ash. He watched the truck disappear down the road, listened to the engine noise fade into the general hum of wilderness, then went back to his perimeter check. The motion sensors were clean. The camera showed nothing but elk and the occasional black bear investigating his trash. Everything was exactly as it should be. He made it to Billings by 6:30, driving his own truck, a Ford F-150 that had 200,000 miles on it, and the kind of reliability that came from never asking it to do anything complicated. The VA office was in a strip mall between a pawn shop and a check cashing place, the kind of neighborhood where people minded their own business because getting involved meant complications. Inside, 15 folding chairs arranged in a circle, fluorescent lights that flickered and hummed, a coffee maker that produced liquid barely distinguishable from motor oil. Veterans in various states of dishevelment, some in worn fatigues, others in civilian clothes that did not quite fit right anymore. Young men, mostly, a few women, all of them carrying the same weight Jacob carried, just without the decades to learn how to hide it better. Doc was already there, talking quietly to a young Hispanic woman who sat with her arms crossed, shoulders hunched, like she was expecting an attack from any direction. When she looked up, Jacob saw the scar tissue that covered the left side of her face, puckered skin that told the story of fire and steel and survival that came at a price. The meeting started with introductions. Names, branches of service, how long since discharge. Jacob sat in the back and said nothing. Doc introduced him anyway. This is Jacob Hawkins, Navy SEAL, retired 1995, served more years than most of you have been alive. If anyone in this room has earned the right to sit in the back and judge the rest of us, it is him. Polite laughter. Jacob felt 28 eyes on him and wanted to leave. He stayed because leaving would prove Doc right about something, and their friendship was built on a foundation of neither man ever admitting the other was correct about anything. The stories came out slowly, the way they always did. Roadside bombs, night patrols gone wrong, friends dying in ways that made no sense. Commands that put politics over survival. The young woman with the scarred face talked about an IED in Kandahar province, about waking up in a field hospital with half her face gone and her spotter dead beside her. Her voice was flat, mechanical, the tone of someone who had told the story so many times it no longer connected to actual memory. When the meeting ended, Doc cornered Jacob by the coffee maker. Elena Vasquez, Army Rangers, discharged 2 years ago, medical, works as a paramedic down on the border. She does not talk much, but when she does, it matters. Reminds me of someone. Jacob looked at the woman. She was pulling on a jacket, preparing to leave, moving with the careful precision of someone who had learned to live inside a body that had betrayed her once and might do it again. Their eyes met across the room. She nodded once, not quite acknowledgement, not quite challenge. Jacob nodded back. You should talk to her, Doc said. She is carrying the same weight you are, just with fewer years to get used to it. I am not here to be anyone's therapist. Neither is she. But maybe you are both here to remember you are not the only one still fighting. Jacob left without speaking to Elena Vasquez. He drove back to the cabin under a sky so full of stars it looked like someone had scattered diamonds across black velvet. The kind of sky that existed only in places far from cities, where light pollution had not yet stolen the universe. He thought about Michael, about the last conversation they had before the deployment that killed him. Michael talking about duty and honor and all the things Jacob had once believed in before they got complicated by reality. Michael saying he was proud to serve, proud to follow in his father's footsteps, proud to wear the trident. Jacob had wanted to tell him the truth, that the trident meant you belonged to something larger than yourself, but that something larger did not always care whether you lived or died. That honor was real, but so was betrayal. That doing the right thing could get you killed just as easily as doing the wrong thing, and sometimes faster. He had said none of that. He had shaken his son's hand, told him to stay sharp, to trust his training, to come home safe. Standard father advice. Useless advice. The kind of advice that made you feel like you had done your duty without actually protecting anyone from anything. The cabin was cold when he returned. He built up the fire, heated a can of soup he did not eat, and sat at the table with the photograph and the pistol. Tomorrow he had a hunting guide job. Some executive from California who wanted to shoot an elk and take photos for his office wall. Easy money, easier than thinking. Sleep came hard, full of the usual nightmares. Michael falling, Sarah's last breath rattling in her chest, Doc screaming in Mogadishu, the faces of men he had killed, men whose names he never learned, men who were just doing their jobs the same way he was doing his. War made everyone the same in the end. Just meat that stopped working when you put enough holes in it. He woke at 3 a.m. to his motion sensors going off. The alarm was subtle, a soft chime that most people would mistake for wind chimes or a phone notification. Jacob was on his feet before conscious thought caught up with muscle memory, pistol in hand, moving to the window in a crouch that made his knees scream but kept him below the sightline. Nothing on the approach road. He checked the camera feeds on the laptop he kept for security. 4 cameras, 4 different angles, all showing empty forest. He waited, counted his heartbeats. 300 beats, 5 minutes of nothing, then movement on camera 3. A deer young buck, moving through the underbrush with the careless confidence of an animal that owned the night. Jacob exhaled, lowered the pistol, felt his heart rate slowly normalize. Just a deer. Just paranoia. Just the same fear that had kept him alive through 3 wars and now existed only to steal his sleep. He made coffee because going back to bed was pointless. Dawn was still 2 hours away, but the sky was already beginning to pale at the edges. That pre-dawn gray that existed in the space between darkness and light. Neither one nor the other. The in-between time. The time when guards were tired and sentries nodded off and attacks came because men made mistakes. The UPS truck arrived at 10 a.m. Jacob almost shot the driver before recognizing the brown uniform and the bored expression of a man who drove mountain routes and had learned to honk his horn from a safe distance to avoid getting killed by paranoid veterans. The driver handed over a package, had Jacob sign on a tablet, and left without asking questions. The package was a priority overnight envelope, thick, addressed to Jacob Hawkins in handwriting Jacob did not recognize. No return address. Postmarked El Paso, Texas, dated 2 days prior. He carried it inside, set it on the table, stared at it for a full minute before opening it. Inside was a USB drive wrapped in a handwritten note on lined paper, the kind you could buy at any gas station. The handwriting was cramped, urgent, the letters pressed hard enough into the paper to leave indentations on the page beneath. Jacob Hawkins, your son discovered the truth. They killed him for it. I am next. This is proof. Trust Derek Cole, Captain James Rivera. Jacob read the note 3 times. His hands were shaking, worse than usual, tremor spreading from fingers to wrists to forearms. He did not recognize the name James Rivera. The name Derek Cole made his chest tighten. Derek had been Michael's best friend, his swim buddy through training, his teammate on 4 deployments. Derek had been at the funeral, stone-faced in his dress blues, and had shaken Jacob's hand with a grip that said, "I am sorry," without using words that would have broken them both. The laptop took 30 seconds to boot, another minute to recognize the USB drive. Jacob expected encryption. What he got was a password prompt with a hint that read, "Trident Father in a year." Jacob typed in Trident Father 2019, the year Michael died, through. The drive unlocked. 2 files. 1 video, 12 minutes long. 1 folder containing PDFs with names like manifests, financial, and photos. Jacob opened the video first. The man on screen was Hispanic, maybe 45, with captain's insignia and a face that belonged to someone who had not slept well in months. He was sitting in what looked like a cheap motel room, dim light from a single lamp, bad camera angle showing too much ceiling. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse, urgent, a man confessing sins to a priest who was not listening. "Sir, my name is James Rivera, Captain, Army Special Forces. I served with your son in Syria 2019. Michael died in my arms." Jacob's vision blurred. He blinked hard, forced himself to focus. "What they told you was a lie, sir. We were not ambushed by ISIS. We were investigating weapons shipments, American military hardware going missing from forward operating bases. Javelins, Stingers, encrypted communication gear, enough firepower to start a small war. Michael found shipping manifests. We traced them to Syria, then further to cartels in Mexico. Someone was selling American weapons to drug traffickers through shadow networks, making it look like combat losses." Rivera paused, rubbed his face with both hands. When he continued, his voice was breaking. Michael confronted our commanding officer. He wanted to report it up the chain, get investigators involved, do everything by the book. The CO told him to stand down, said it was above our pay grade. Next day, we got orders for a reconnaissance patrol outside Raqqa. Routine sweep, nothing unusual. Except it was a setup, sir. We took sniper fire. Only Michael was hit. Single shot, back of the head, execution style. The rest of us were untouched. ISIS did not do that. A professional did. Jacob felt something cold spreading through his chest. Something that had nothing to do with the temperature in the cabin. I kept my mouth shut, sir. I am not proud of that. But I kept digging, quiet-like, after we rotated home. Followed the money, the shipping routes, the authorization codes. Trail leads back to Washington. General Warren Briggs, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, he has been running a black budget program called Project Cerberus. Billions in military tech funneled to cartels, justifying increased defense spending, destabilizing Mexico to keep border security contractors fat and happy. Your son found proof. They killed him to bury it. Rivera leaned forward, face filling the screen, eyes desperate. I have everything on this drive, sir. Financial records, photos, communications. Enough to burn down half the Pentagon. But they know I know. I have about 48 hours before they find me, maybe less. If you are watching this, I am already dead. I am sorry I did not speak up sooner. I am sorry I let your son die alone, thinking no one would finish what he started. Please, sir, finish it. Make them pay. The password is Trident Father 2019. Michael talked about you all the time. Said you taught him that principles matter more than orders. He died believing that. Do not let it be for nothing. The video ended. Jacob sat motionless, staring at the black screen, feeling the weight of 5 years pressing down on him like a physical force. Michael had not died in combat. Michael had been murdered, assassinated, executed by his own side because he tried to do the right thing. Jacob opened the folder labeled Financial, spreadsheets, columns of numbers, wire transfers, shell companies with names like Cerberus Logistics and Phoenix Tactical Solutions. Amounts in the millions, then tens of millions, then hundreds of millions. A 5-year trail of weapons shipments listed as combat losses, training expenditures, material transfers to non-existent units. The photos folder made his stomach clench. General Warren Briggs, 4 stars gleaming on his shoulders, shaking hands with men in expensive suits at locations tagged Dubai, Singapore, Mexico City. Close-up shots of documents with classified headers in Briggs's signature authorizing transfers of Javelin missiles, Stinger systems, encrypted radios, night vision equipment, the kind of gear that made small armies into real armies. The last file was labeled Michael Hawkins after action. Jacob almost did not open it. His finger hovered over the mouse button for 10 seconds before muscle memory and training overrode emotion. Know your enemy. Know your battlefield. Know what you are walking into. The document was Michael's final report, written the day before he died. Concise, professional, exactly the kind of work Jacob had taught him to produce. Subject line read, unauthorized weapons transfers, immediate investigation required. 3 pages detailing everything Rivera had just described, with photographic evidence attached. The last line read, requesting immediate investigation by NCIS and DOD Inspector General. Evidence suggests criminal activity at flag officer level. Will provide full testimony upon return to CONUS. The next document was the official after-action report filed the day after Michael died. ISIS ambush, heavy casualties. Captain Michael Hawkins killed in action during firefight. No mention of weapons trafficking. No mention of investigations. Just another name added to a list of men who died doing their jobs in places most Americans could not find on a map. Jacob closed the laptop. His hands were steady now. The tremor was gone, replaced by something colder, harder. The same focus that had carried him through ambushes and firefights and missions, where the margin between success and failure was measured in heartbeats. Michael had tried to do the right thing. The system had killed him for it. And Jacob had spent 5 years believing the official story, mourning his son as a war casualty instead of a murder victim. He looked at the pistol on the table. Not today, not tomorrow, not until this was finished. The sat phone was in the loft, wrapped in foil to prevent tracking, a relic from operations that officially never happened. Jacob climbed the ladder, his knees protesting every rung, and unwrapped the phone. He had 2 numbers memorized. One was Doc's. The other belonged to Derek Cole. Derek answered on the 3rd ring, voice cautious, professional. This is Cole. Derek, it is Jacob Hawkins. Silence for 5 seconds. Then, sir, I was not expecting to hear from you. I need to see you in person, not on base, not anywhere official, somewhere we can talk. Sir, is everything all right? No, nothing is all right. Can you get to Montana? When? Soon as possible. This is about Michael. Another pause, longer this time. Sir, I do not understand. You will. Just come alone and do not tell anyone where you are going. Can you do that? Derek's voice changed, took on the edge of a man who had just realized he was standing on a trapdoor. Yes, sir, I can be there in 2 days. Good. I will send coordinates. And Derek, bring your gear, all of it. Jacob ended the call before Derek could ask more questions. He descended the ladder, booted up the laptop again, and started copying files to a second USB drive. Redundancy. If something happened to one copy, there had to be another. If something happened to him, someone else had to know. He was sealing the duplicate drive in waterproof plastic when his phone rang. The regular cell phone, not the sat phone. Unknown number, Texas area code. Jacob considered not answering. Answered anyway. Jacob Hawkins, a woman's voice. Young, strained. My name is Elena Vasquez. I met you at the VA meeting last night. Doc gave me your number. I remember. I need help. I think someone is trying to kill me. Jacob felt his pulse quicken. Last week I was working ambulance runs at the border. Picked up some migrants, standard stuff, dehydration and exposure. But one of them told me something weird. Said they saw soldiers moving weapons at night, military trucks with Mexican plates, near the crossing at Nogales. I filed a report with Border Patrol. Yesterday my apartment got broken into. Nothing stolen, but my place was tossed like someone was searching for something. And this morning, a man followed me from my apartment to the hospital. When I confronted him, he ran. Did you see his face? Enough to know he was not local. Professional, military bearing. And he had a tattoo on his neck, some kind of bird with wings spread. Jacob closed his eyes. Phoenix, the logo for Phoenix Tactical Solutions, one of the shell companies in the financial documents. They were cleaning up loose ends. Rivera was dead. Now they were coming for anyone who might know something. Miss Vasquez, where are you right now? Hospital break room. My shift ends in 2 hours. Do not go home. Do not go anywhere familiar. Get in your car and drive north. You know how to check if you are being followed? I was a ranger. I know how to run a surveillance detection route. Good. Head toward Flagstaff, then cut east toward Albuquerque. Find a motel, pay cash, park where you can see the door. I will call you back in 6 hours with instructions. What is happening? The same thing that happened to my son. The same thing that is about to happen to a lot of people if we do not stop it. Can you follow orders? Yes, sir. Then do exactly what I just told you. And Miss Vasquez, if anyone approaches you, anyone at all, you run first and ask questions never. Understood? Understood. The call ended. Jacob sat at the table looking at the photograph of his son, at the evidence scattered across his laptop screen, at the pistol that now represented not an ending, but a beginning. Doc arrived 30 minutes later, announced by the crunch of tires on gravel. Jacob met him at the door. We need to talk. Doc took one look at Jacob's face and nodded. Whatever this is, it is bad. They sat at the table. Jacob played Rivera's video. Doc watched in silence, face hardening with each passing minute. When it ended, he sat back and exhaled slowly. Lord have mercy. Michael tried to blow the whistle and they killed him for it. General Warren Briggs, Joint Chiefs. I met him once, Doc. At Michael's funeral. He gave the eulogy. Talked about sacrifice and duty and serving something larger than yourself. He looked me in the eye and told me my son died a hero. The whole time he knew. He knew. What are you going to do? Jacob pulled a duplicate USB drive from his pocket, set it on the table between them. I am going to finish what Michael started. I am going to expose Project Cerberus, burn down everyone involved, and make sure they pay for every life they destroyed. Doc looked at the drive, then at Jacob. That is a suicide mission. You are talking about going up against a 4-star general, shadow contractors, cartel partners, probably half of Washington. They will kill you. Probably, but they already killed my son. They already destroyed everything I cared about. What are they going to take from me that I have not already lost? Your life. That still counts for something. Does it? Because from where I am sitting, being alive just means I get to wake up every morning and remember everyone who is not. At least if I do this, it means something. At least they did not die for nothing. Doc was quiet for a long time, fingers drumming on the table, the way they always did when he was thinking through tactics. Finally, he sighed. You are going to do this no matter what I say, are you not? Yes. And if I try to talk you out of it, you will just do it alone and get yourself killed faster. Yes. Doc nodded slowly. Then I guess I am coming with you. Someone needs to keep you alive long enough to actually finish this thing. You have Gloria, you have grandkids. You do not need to be part of this. Jacob, I have been part of this since the day we met. You dragged my legless ass out of Mogadishu while people were shooting at us. You think I am going to let you go into this alone? That is not how this works. That is not how we work. The two men looked at each other across the table, across 40 years of shared history, across wars and losses, and the kind of bond that only forms when you have seen each other at the absolute worst and still chosen to stand together. Okay, Jacob said. Okay. So what is the plan? Jacob spread out the laptop, showed Doc the evidence, explained about Elena Vasquez and Derek Cole. We need to get to Derek first. If anyone at the Pentagon can help us navigate this without getting killed immediately, it is him. Then we need to secure Vasquez. She is a loose end they will tie up as soon as they realize she filed that report. After that, we figure out how to make this public without getting silenced first. And how do we do that? I have no idea. But I have 2 days to figure it out before Derek gets here. Doc stood, limped to the door, looked out at the mountains that surrounded them. You know they are probably already looking for Rivera's evidence. If they track that package to you, they will come here. I know. That is why we need to be ready. Doc turned, grinned the way he used to before missions when they were young and stupid and convinced of their own immortality. So we are back in business. 2 old bastards against the system. Just like the old days. Just like the old days. Except this time we are not doing it for the government. We are doing it in spite of them. Even better. That night, Jacob did not touch the pistol. He cleaned his rifle instead, checked ammunition counts, inventoried medical supplies. The tremor in his hands was gone, replaced by the steady calm of a man who had found purpose again. It did not matter that the purpose was probably going to get him killed. What mattered was that it meant something. What mattered was that Michael's death would not be just another casualty buried under classified reports and official lies. He worked until midnight, then slept without dreams for the first time in 5 years. When dawn came, he rose with the sun, made coffee, and looked at the photograph of his son. "I am coming, Michael. I do not know if I can win this, but I promise you, they are going to know I tried." The mountains listened in silence, keeping their secrets the way they always had. Waiting to see if this old warrior had one more fight left in him, Jacob Hawkins intended to find out. The last patrol was beginning, and this time failure was not an option, because failure meant Michael had died for nothing, and Jacob would burn down the entire world before he let that be true. The Arizona desert at night is a different country than the Arizona desert by day. When the sun drops behind the mountains, the land exhales heat like a dying animal releasing its last breath. The temperature falls 40 degrees in 2 hours, turning sand that could fry an egg into something cold enough to make you reach for a jacket. The darkness is absolute in places where civilization has not yet planted its flags of streetlights and strip malls. Under that darkness, things move that prefer not to be seen. Elena Vasquez had been driving for 11 hours straight when she finally pulled into the parking lot of a motel outside Holbrook, Arizona. The kind of place that rented rooms by the hour or the week, but rarely anything in between, where the neon sign flickered with 2 letters burned out and the parking lot asphalt had more cracks than smooth surface. She parked the Honda Civic where she could see both the room door and the highway exit, backed in the way they taught you in tactical driving courses, ready to leave fast if leaving became necessary. Her phone had rung twice during the drive, both times unknown numbers. Both times she let it go to voicemail. The first message was breathing, nothing else, 30 seconds of someone listening to her recorded voice telling them to leave a message. The second was a man with a flat Midwest accent asking if she was Elena Vasquez and saying they needed to discuss her Border Patrol report. She deleted both without calling back. The room smelled like cigarette smoke and disinfectant. That particular combination that meant the last occupant had done something the management wanted to forget. Elena locked the door, pushed the dresser against it for good measure, and sat on the bed with her back to the wall and her knife in her hand. Not a combat knife, just a folding buck knife she had carried since her ranger days. But it was sharp, and she knew how to use it. The scar tissue on the left side of her face itched the way it always did when stress kicked her nervous system into overdrive. She resisted the urge to scratch it. Scratching only made it worse. 28 years old and her life had somehow become a cheap thriller. She thought about her father, the man she barely remembered, the Marine who came home from Iraq in a flag-draped coffin when she was 7. Her mother had told her that her father died doing something important, protecting people who could not protect themselves. Elena had joined the army to understand what that meant. 4 years later, an IED in Kandahar province taught her that sometimes protecting people just meant being in the wrong place when physics decided to demonstrate the destructive potential of homemade explosives. The burns had healed. The discharge papers said medical retirement with full benefits, which was military speak for "we are sorry you got blown up, but you are no longer useful to us." The nightmares had not healed. Neither had the anger at a system that spent $1 trillion on a war and could not be bothered to properly armor the vehicles they sent young soldiers into. But she had found work as a paramedic, found a way to keep helping people, found a reason to get up in the morning that did not involve staring at a pistol and wondering if today was the day the pain outweighed the point. Now someone wanted her dead for filing a report about weapons shipments at the border, which meant Jacob Hawkins was right, which meant whatever she had stumbled into was big enough to kill for and connected enough to find her apartment 200 miles from where she saw those trucks, which meant she was in deeper trouble than a buck knife and a Honda Civic were equipped to handle. Her phone rang at 200 hours, the screen lighting up the dark room like a tiny sun. "Jacob Hawkins," the caller ID said. She answered on the second ring. "Talk to me. I am in Holbrook. Motel called the Desert Rose. Room 14. Anyone follow you?" "No, I ran counter surveillance the whole way. If someone was on me, they were better than I am." "Good. Stay there, lock the door. Do not open it for anyone. I am sending someone to pick you up." "Who?" "Man named Derek Cole. Navy SEAL, early 30s, 6'1", dark hair. He will knock 3 times, pause, then twice more. Do not open the door unless you hear that exact pattern. When will he be there? 6 hours, maybe less. Can you stay awake that long? Elena looked at the door, at the window with its thin curtains, at the knife in her hand. Sleep was not on the menu anyway. I can stay awake. If anything happens before Cole gets there, you run. Do not try to fight. Do not try to be a hero. Just run and call me. What is going on? What did I see at that border crossing? The same thing my son saw in Syria. The same thing that got him killed. I will explain everything when you are safe. Right now, all that matters is keeping you alive. The call ended. Elena set the phone on the nightstand, blade within reach, and watched the door the way a sentry watches a perimeter. The hours crawled past with the peculiar slowness of time measured in heartbeats and shallow breaths. Every sound outside became a threat. Every car passing on the highway became a potential attack. Every footstep in the hallway became the prelude to violence. At 05:30, headlights swept across her window. A truck pulled into the lot. Big Ford F-250, Montana plates, tinted windows. Elena moved to the corner where she had a sight line to both door and window, knife ready, get ready, body coiled. The truck parked 2 spaces away. The driver killed the engine. Nothing happened for 30 seconds. Then the door opened. The man who stepped out moved like water, smooth and deliberate, the kind of economy of motion that came from training so deep it bypassed conscious thought. He was tall, lean, dressed in jeans and a dark jacket that probably hid at least 2 weapons. He scanned the parking lot with a professional sweep, not obvious about it, just a man checking his surroundings the way people in dangerous professions learn to do. Then he walked to room 14. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks. Elena opened the door 6 inches, chains still engaged. The man stood with his hands visible, relaxed but ready, the posture of someone who could go from calm to lethal in the space between heartbeats. Elena Vasquez? She nodded. Derek Cole. Colonel Hawkins sent me. We need to move. How do I know you are who you say you are? Derek reached slowly into his jacket, pulled out a phone, showed her a photo. 3 men in desert camouflage, arms around each other. Exhausted smiles that belonged to people who had just survived something difficult together. She recognized Jacob Hawkins, younger but unmistakable. Next to him, a young man with the same eyes, same jawline, Michael Hawkins. And on the other side, younger but clear, Derek Cole. Michael was my best friend, Derek said quietly. His father asked me to keep you safe. I intend to do that. Elena released the chain, opened the door. Derek stepped inside, did a quick sweep of the room with his eyes, noted the dresser pushed against the wall, the knife on the bed, the tactical positioning. He nodded approval. You know how to think. That is good. Makes my job easier. What is your job exactly? Right now, keeping you alive long enough to get you to Montana. After that, we are all going to have a conversation about why multiple agencies appear to want you dead. They gathered Elena's few belongings, wiped down surfaces she had touched out of habit more than necessity, and left the key on the dresser. The truck had Wyoming plates now, not Montana. Derek saw her notice. Rotation. Makes it harder to track. Old habits. They drove north through pre-dawn darkness. Highway empty except for long-haul truckers and people running from something or toward it. Derek drove 5 miles over the speed limit. Not fast enough to attract attention, not slow enough to be memorable. Professional work. Colonel Hawkins said you were Michael's friend. Derek's jaw tightened. Still am. Being dead does not change that. He told me Michael was murdered. The truck was silent for half a mile. Then Derek spoke, voice flat and controlled the way people sound when they are holding something dangerous behind their teeth. I was there when it happened. Syria, outside Raqqa. We were doing reconnaissance on weapon shipments, stuff that was going missing from our own supply depots. Michael found evidence that it was not insurgents stealing the weapons. It was us, our own people selling American military hardware through shadow networks to cartels, warlords, anyone with money. Elena felt ice forming in her stomach. What did he do? What any good officer would do. He reported it, filed an after-action report, requested an investigation, followed every regulation in the book. 2 days later, we got orders for a patrol outside the wire. Standard sweep, nothing unusual, except we took sniper fire. 1 shot. back of Michael's head. The rest of us were not touched. ISIS does not work like that. ISIS uses volume of fire, suppression, chaos. This was surgical, professional. So you knew. I knew something was wrong. I did not know what. The official report said combat casualty. Our command told us to shut up and move on. I kept my head down because I wanted to stay alive and because I did not have proof of anything. Then 3 days ago, I got a call from Colonel Hawkins. He sent me a video from a man named James Rivera. Captain, Special Forces, investigating the same weapons network Michael found. Rivera spelled it out, chapter and verse. Project Cerberus, General Warren Briggs. 5 years of weapons trafficking disguised as combat losses. Michael died because he tried to stop it. Where is Rivera now? Dead. Executed in an El Paso motel 48 hours after he mailed that evidence to Hawkins. They are cleaning house, eliminating anyone who knows anything. Which brings us to you. What did you see at that border crossing? Elena told him about the migrants, about the soldiers moving weapons in trucks with Mexican plates, about the report she filed with Border Patrol. But there was something else she had not mentioned to Hawkins yet, something that had been gnawing at her since that night. One of the migrants, a woman from Guatemala, had been hysterical, babbling about children. Not her own children, other children, being moved in one of those trucks alongside the weapons, small faces pressed against canvas, silent and terrified. Elena had tried to get more details, but the woman had shut down, too traumatized to speak. Derek listened without interrupting, his face getting harder with each detail. When she mentioned the children, he actually pulled the truck over to the shoulder and turned to look at her directly. Children? You are sure? The migrant said she saw them, maybe 6 or 7 kids. Young, maybe 8 to 12 years old, being transported with the weapons. I thought maybe she was confused, traumatized from the crossing. But now you realize she saw exactly what she said she saw. Derek's voice was cold. They are not just trafficking weapons. They are trafficking people, kids. The silence in the truck was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of an 18-wheeler passing on the highway. Elena felt sick. Weapons were one thing. You could justify it as strategy, as pragmatism, as the ugly calculus of geopolitics. But children, there was no justifying that, no rationalizing it, just pure evil dressed up in manifests and shell companies. Does Hawkins know? Not yet. But he needs to, because if we are going after these people, we need to understand how deep this goes. And if there are kids involved, that changes everything. They stopped for gas outside Flagstaff. Derek paid cash, filled the tank while watching the road with the relaxed vigilance of a man who had done this in countries where gas stations doubled as ambush sites. Elena bought coffee from a machine that produced something resembling brown water with delusions of flavor. They were back on the road in 6 minutes. Why are you helping Hawkins? Elena asked. You could pretend you never got that message. Go back to your unit. Stay safe. Derek's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Because Michael was my brother in every way that matters. Because I stood at his funeral and shook his father's hand and told him I was sorry. Because every day since then, I have been living with the knowledge that I knew something was wrong and I did nothing. Maybe I cannot bring Michael back, but I can make sure the people who killed him pay for it. That is worth more than staying safe. They reached Billings, Montana just after noon. The city sat in a valley surrounded by rimrock cliffs, the Yellowstone River cutting through it like a scar, blue under a sky so clear it hurt to look at. Derek navigated surface streets with the confidence of someone who had studied maps, pulling into the parking lot of a VA hospital that looked like every other VA hospital in America. Underfunded, understaffed, overworked, held together by the will of people who gave a damn when the system did not. Marcus Washington was waiting for them in the lobby, prosthetic legs and kind eyes, and the bearing of a man who had seen hell and decided it was not worth staying. He shook Derek's hand with the formality of warriors meeting on neutral ground, then turned to Elena. Miss Vasquez, Doc Washington, pleasure to meet someone who had the good sense to stay alive. His smile was genuine. Elena found herself smiling back despite the circumstances. They followed Doc to a consultation room, empty at this hour, with chairs arranged in a circle and posters about PTSD and suicide prevention on the walls. Jacob Hawkins sat in one of those chairs, looking older and harder than he had at the VA meeting days before. Next to him on the table sat a laptop and a pistol. The pistol looked well-maintained. So did Jacob. Derek, Jacob stood, shook the younger man's hand with both of his own. Thank you for coming. I should have come sooner, sir. Should have done something 5 years ago. You are here now. That is what matters. Jacob turned to Elena. Miss Vasquez, I apologize for dragging you into this. With respect, sir, I was already in this the moment I saw those weapons. I just did not know it yet. Fair enough. Sit. We have a lot to discuss and not much time to do it. They sat. Jacob opened the laptop, pulled up files, started talking. He laid it out the way a commander briefs a mission, clear and concise, and without wasted words. Project Cerberus, General Briggs, 5 years of weapons trafficking, Michael's murder, Rivera's execution, the evidence, the conspiracy, the stakes. When Elena mentioned the children, the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Jacob's face went from hard to something beyond hard, something carved from stone and rage. Doc closed his eyes and moved his lips in what might have been prayer. Derek sat with his fists clenched so tight his knuckles went white. Children. Jacob said the word like he was testing its weight, like he was trying to understand how it fit into the equation of corruption they were fighting. They are trafficking children. The migrant was specific. 6 or 7 kids, young, in one of the weapons trucks. I do not know where they were being taken or why. Jacob was quiet for a full minute, staring at the laptop screen without seeing it, processing this new layer of evil. When he spoke, his voice was colder than Elena had ever heard a human voice sound. Then we are not just stopping a weapons ring. We are stopping a slave trade. And if there are children involved, if they are being moved through the same routes as the weapons, then we have to assume the worst about where they are going and what is being done to them. The plan is to expose this, Doc said. All of it. Briggs, his network, everyone involved. We take the evidence public in a way they cannot bury or spin. Then we let the system eat itself. That was the plan, Jacob said. Before we knew about the children, now the plan changes. How, Derek asked. We do not just expose them. We hit them. We find where the next shipment is moving. We intercept it. We take the weapons, yes. But if there are children in those trucks, we take them too. We get them safe. Then we burn down everyone responsible. The room was silent. Elena realized she was holding her breath. Derek leaned forward. Sir, that is not reconnaissance anymore. That is a combat operation against what, a dozen cartel sicarios with automatic weapons? Maybe more. And if there are kids involved, the risk triples. Any gunfight near children. I know, Jacob said flatly, which is why we have to be perfect, which is why we cannot afford to fail. Those kids are in that situation because people like Briggs decided profit was more important than human lives. We are going to get them out, and then we are going to make sure the men who put them there never see daylight again. Doc spoke up. This changes everything. It is not just about justice for Michael anymore. It is about saving lives, kids who do not have anyone else. Exactly. Jacob looked at each of them in turn. I will understand if any of you want out. This is more dangerous than I thought. The stakes are higher. The consequences if we fail are worse. But I am doing this, with or without help. Those children deserve someone willing to fight for them. Michael would have fought for them. So will I. Elena felt something shift inside her chest. Something that had been broken since Kandahar, since the discharge, since she stopped believing that fighting for people who could not fight for themselves actually meant anything. She had been looking for a reason, for a mission that mattered, for proof that her father had been right when he chose duty over coming home. I am in, she said. Derek nodded. Me too. Doc sighed. Lord help us all. But yes, I am in. They spent the next 6 hours planning. Maps spread across the table, satellite photos pulled from online sources, timelines calculated based on Elena's report. The convoy moved every 2 weeks, late at night when Border Patrol shifts were thinnest and surveillance drones were focused elsewhere. The next shipment would be in 3 days. They had 72 hours to position, prepare, and execute an operation that would either expose one of the largest military scandals in American history or get them all killed trying to save children who had been turned into cargo. Equipment was the next problem. Jacob had weapons, but they needed communication gear. Night vision that actually worked, body armor, medical supplies beyond basic first aid, and most critically, a way to transport potentially traumatized children out of a war zone. Doc made calls to contacts in the veteran community, men who had left the service but kept their gear because old habits die hard and trust in the government died harder. By evening, they had assembled a loadout that would not win any wars but might keep them alive through one very bad night. They left Billings at dawn, 2 trucks heading south through Wyoming and Colorado toward the Arizona border. Jacob drove the lead vehicle with Doc, while Derek and Elena followed in the second. The drive took 16 hours with stops for gas and food eaten from convenience store shelves. They spoke little. Warriors before combat rarely do. The border region outside Nogales looked like the surface of a dead planet. Scrub brush, rocky soil, mesas that rose like tombstones against a sky-bleached white by sun. The temperature at midday hit 108 degrees. At night it dropped to 60. Water was scarce. Cover was scarcer. It was the kind of terrain where small mistakes became fatal ones and large mistakes did not leave bodies to recover. They set up observation posts on a ridge overlooking the dirt road Elena had described, a position with sight lines in 3 directions and an escape route to the north. Jacob and Derek took first watch, scanning the valley below through binoculars and a spotting scope that had seen action in multiple countries and still worked better than anything modern. "How long were you with Michael?" Jacob asked after an hour of silence. "4 years, sir. Training, 4 deployments. He was the best operator I ever worked with. Smart, calm under pressure, never made the same mistake twice." "Did he talk about home?" "Sometimes. He talked about his mother, how much he missed her. He talked about you, about hunting trips when he was a kid, about lessons you taught him. He was proud of you, sir, wanted to make you proud." Jacob was quiet for a long time. "I was proud of him. I should have told him that more. Should have told him a lot of things." "He knew, sir. Trust me, he knew." The convoy appeared on the second night, exactly when Elena said it would. 4 vehicles, American-made SUVs with Mexican plates, moving without headlights across terrain that would destroy suspension on civilian vehicles. They drove with the confidence of people who had made this run before and expected no resistance. Jacob counted personnel through the scope. 16 men, maybe 18. All armed, mostly AK pattern rifles, a few carrying American M4s that probably came from the same shipments they were transporting. The vehicles stopped at a flat area half a mile from the ridge, near a cluster of abandoned buildings that might have been a ranch before economics or violence drove the owners away. "Showtime," Jacob keyed his radio. "Derek, Elena, you see them?" "Affirmative." Derek's voice came back calm and professional. 18 hostiles, 4 vehicles. They are unloading crates now. "Can you identify contents?" "Negative on full inventory. But I see weapon crates." And he paused. "Sir, I have visual on what looks like a covered truck bed. Canvas tarp. Could be the children." "Copy. Watch that vehicle. That is priority 1. We get those kids out before anything else happens." The sun dropped behind the mountains, turning the sky red, then purple, then black. Stars appeared in their millions, the kind of display that city dwellers never saw and soldiers learned to navigate by. Jacob checked his gear one last time. Rifle loaded, suppressor attached, sidearm ready, 4 magazines, 2 grenades, body armor that had seen better days but still stopped bullets, knife on his belt. Doc looked at him in the darkness. "You ready for this, old man?" Jacob smiled, felt the familiar pre-combat clarity settling over him like a second skin. "I have been ready for this for 5 years. Let us go finish it." They moved down the ridge in pairs, using terrain and darkness for concealment, a slow, careful approach that took 20 minutes to cover half a mile. Derek and Elena flanked right. Jacob and Doc took the left. 4 people against 18. Bad odds by any calculation. But wars were not won by people who waited for good odds. The first guard never saw Jacob coming. A hand over the mouth, knife between ribs, angled up toward the heart. The man went down silently. Jacob lowered him to the ground, took his radio, his magazine pouches. 1 down, 17 to go. Derek's voice whispered in Jacob's ear. "Second guard down, east approach clear. Copy. Moving to vehicles." They reached the abandoned buildings from 3 directions simultaneously. The weapons were laid out in neat rows. Javelin missiles, Stinger systems, crates of ammunition. And in the back of the 3rd vehicle, under canvas tarp, 7 children huddled together. 6 boys, 1 girl, ages 8 to 13. Hispanic indigenous features, eyes that had seen things no child should see. They were not bound, but they did not try to run. They had learned that running made things worse. Elena reached the truck first, moving with a speed and silence that came from training and necessity. She pulled back the tarp slowly, saw the children, felt her heart break and harden simultaneously. One of the boys looked at her with eyes that were already dead inside. "It is okay," Elena whispered in Spanish. "We are here to help. We are getting you out." The boy did not respond. None of them did. They had learned not to trust adults who made promises. Jacob photographed everything, using a camera with no GPS, no wireless, nothing that could be traced. The weapons, the vehicles, the children. Evidence that would burn down careers and end lives and maybe, just maybe, change how the system worked. Then he keyed his radio. "Doc, bring the truck." "On the way." That was when the shooting started. One of the convoy guards had stepped outside for a cigarette, had seen movement, had raised his rifle and opened fire. The darkness erupted with muzzle flashes. The sharp crack of AK fire, shouted commands in Spanish. Jacob returned fire, controlled bursts, 2 rounds per target. A man dropped, then another. But there were too many of them, and they were spreading out, using the vehicles for cover, directing fire toward Jacob's position with increasing accuracy. Elena was at the truck with the children, using her body as a shield, yelling at them in Spanish to get down and stay down. Derek was on the roof of one building, suppressed rifle coughing quietly, precision work, each shot a kill. But the convoy personnel were professionals too, former military most likely, and they adapted quickly. Jacob felt the impact before he heard the shot, a hammer blow to his left shoulder that spun him around and dropped him to one knee. Body armor caught most of it, but the blunt force trauma drove the air from his lungs. He forced himself up, returned fire, heard Doc shouting over the radio. "Jacob is hit! Jacob is hit!" "I am fine, keep moving." He was not fine. Blood was running down his arm, hot and sticky, enough to know the round had found flesh after all. But fine was relative, and right now relative meant still able to fight. He pushed himself toward the nearest vehicle, started the engine, began backing it toward the children. Derek and Elena provided covering fire while Jacob maneuvered the Suburban next to the truck with the kids. Doc arrived in their backup vehicle, pulling up on the other side, creating a corridor of steel between the children and the gunfire. They loaded the kids fast, Elena lifting them bodily and pushing them into the back seat, talking to them constantly in Spanish, telling them it was almost over, telling them to hold on. A grenade detonated 50 feet away, shrapnel pinging off metal. Jacob felt something hot slice across his cheek. Another guard went down, then another. The cartel team was breaking, pulling back, deciding that whatever they were being paid was not worth dying for. Jacob slammed the vehicle into drive and accelerated north, Derek and Elena laying down a suppressive fire to cover the retreat. Doc drove the second truck, keeping pace, both vehicles bouncing over terrain that had no concept of shock absorbers or comfort. Behind them, the abandoned ranch complex lit up with more gunfire as the remaining guards shot at shadows, their training failing them in the chaos. They drove through the night, taking dirt roads and fire trails, avoiding highways and anywhere with cameras. By dawn, they were 200 miles from the ambush site, the trucks loaded with stolen weapons and 7 children who had not spoken a single word since the rescue. Jacob pulled into an abandoned gas station, killed the engine, and nearly passed out from blood loss. Doc caught him, eased him back against the seat. Elena checked on the children, finding them physically unharmed, but psychologically shattered. Derek stood watch, scanning the horizon for pursuit that might or might not come. "Is he okay?" Elena asked, gesturing to Jacob. "He is alive," Doc said, "which is about the best we can hope for right now." Jacob forced his eyes open, forced himself to focus. "Did we get them? The kids?" Derek held up the camera. "Every crate documented, every serial number, and 7 children safe. Sir, we did it." "Good." Jacob's voice was fading. "Then we moved to phase 2. But first we need to get these kids somewhere safe. Somewhere Briggs and his people cannot find them." "I know a place," Doc said quietly. "Old friend runs a reservation up in New Mexico, outside federal jurisdiction. They will take care of the kids, no questions asked. Give us time to figure out next moves." "How far?" 6 hours, maybe 7. "Then drive." Jacob closed his eyes. "And Doc, thank you for everything." "Thank you nothing. You just rest. We still have a war to finish." They bound Jacob's wound, gave him water, let him rest while Doc took the wheel. The children gradually began to speak, first in whispers to Elena, who sat with them in the back, then in small conversations among themselves. They had been taken from their families 3 weeks ago, promised work in America, transported like cargo through networks that treated them as inventory. Some were destined for agricultural labor, others for purposes too dark to speak aloud. But they were free now, and the men who had stolen them would pay. As the sun climbed higher and the desert began to bake under relentless heat, 4 warriors and 7 children drove toward a future that remained uncertain, but was at least their own. Jacob Hawkins slept in the passenger seat, wounded but alive, his mission not complete, but closer to completion than it had been 24 hours ago. The mountains ahead rose like promises. Behind them, evidence of conspiracy lay scattered across an ambush site that would soon be crawling with federal agents and journalists and people asking questions that had been buried for too long. The last patrol was approaching its most dangerous phase, because now they had not just evidence, they had witnesses. They had children who represented living proof of how deep the corruption went, and they had a 4-star general who would burn the world down before he let that proof see daylight. But Jacob Hawkins had burned worlds before, and he was just getting started. The Navajo Nation Reservation outside Shiprock, New Mexico, exists in a space between worlds. Legally, it is sovereign territory, subject to tribal law rather than federal jurisdiction. Practically, it is a place where America prefers not to look too closely, where poverty and pride exist in uncomfortable balance, where people remember treaties broken and promises forgotten. It is also a place where warriors understand honor, where men who have served in foreign wars come home to land that has belonged to their people for longer than the United States has existed as a nation. Thomas Begay had been Doc Washington's friend since their time together at a field hospital in the First Gulf War. Doc had saved his life when a mortar round turned their medical tent into a slaughterhouse. Thomas had returned the favor years later when Doc needed someone who would ask no questions and provide shelter for people the government wanted disappeared. That was the kind of friendship that transcended politics and paperwork. It was the kind that mattered when the system failed. The trucks arrived at Thomas's compound just after noon, dust trailing behind them like smoke, heat shimmering off the hood in waves that made the desert look like it was breathing. Thomas stood in the doorway of a low adobe building, arms crossed, face unreadable. He was 70 years old now, gray braids hanging past his shoulders, weathered skin that spoke of decades under the southwestern sun. When he saw Doc climb out of the truck, moving slow on prosthetic legs, his face split into a smile. Marcus Washington, still too ugly to die, I see. Thomas Begay, still too stubborn to retire. They embraced with the careful affection of men who had seen each other at their worst and still chose friendship. Then Thomas looked past Doc at the other trucks, at Jacob being helped out by Derek, at Elena in the back seat with 7 children who looked like ghosts of themselves, hollow-eyed and silent. "What have you brought me, old friend?" "Trouble," Doc said quietly. "The kind that ends careers and destroys reputations. The kind that powerful men will kill to keep buried. Then you came to the right place. Come, we will talk inside." The compound consisted of 4 buildings arranged in a square around a central courtyard. Living quarters, meeting hall, medical clinic, and storage. All of it simple but well-maintained. Solar panels on the roofs, satellite dish pointing at the sky. Modern infrastructure wrapped in traditional architecture. Thomas led them to the meeting hall where the temperature was 20 degrees cooler thanks to thick walls and cross-ventilation. Jacob sat heavily in a chair while Doc examined his shoulder wound properly for the first time in daylight. The bullet had gone through, missing bone but tearing muscle. It needed stitches, antibiotics, and rest. Jacob would get 2 out of 3. Rest was not on the schedule. The children were taken to the medical clinic where Thomas's daughter, a nurse trained at University of New Mexico, examined them with gentle efficiency. Physical injuries were minimal. Psychological trauma was extensive. They had been fed, watered, transported like livestock. They had watched others who resisted being beaten, or worse. They had learned that silence was survival. Undoing that lesson would take time and care and patience. Elena stayed with them, speaking soft Spanish, telling them they were safe now, that no one would hurt them here. Some believed her, some did not. All of them watched the doors with animal wariness, ready to run at the first sign of danger. In the meeting hall, Jacob laid out the situation for Thomas. Project Cerberus, General Briggs, weapons trafficking, children being moved as cargo, evidence that could bring down a four-star general and everyone connected to him, and the certainty that Briggs would send people to eliminate everyone who knew. Thomas listened without interrupting, his face growing harder with each detail. When Jacob finished, he sat back and looked at the four people in front of him. A wounded old SEAL, a legless medic, a young SEAL with everything to lose, a scarred ranger with nothing left but the mission. Four people against the machinery of military corruption and political power. "You know they will come here," Thomas finally said. "The reservation may be sovereign territory, but that has never stopped the federal government before. If they want you badly enough, they will come." "I know," Jacob said, "which is why we need to move fast. We have evidence, we have witnesses, we need to get it all public before they can silence us. That means press conference, live stream, multiple outlets simultaneously. Make it impossible to bury. And if they come before you can do that, then we fight," Jacob said flatly, "because these children deserve better than being disappeared into the same system that failed them the first time." Thomas nodded slowly. "Then you will have help. I have 30 men here, veterans all of them. Marines, Army, some SEALs like you. They came home to the reservation because they could not stand being out there anymore, in a country that thanks them for their service and then ignores them. But they remember how to fight, and they will fight for children. That is something worth fighting for. I cannot ask you to risk your people for this. You are not asking. I am offering. And I speak for all of us when I say that if there are men who traffic children, who use their rank and power to destroy innocence, then those men deserve whatever comes to them. We will stand with you. Make your preparations." They worked through the afternoon, turning the compound into a defensive position. Fields of fire established. Approaches covered. Communications set up. The camera equipment for live streaming tested and retested. Jacob wanted redundancy, wanted multiple backups, wanted it to be impossible for the stream to be stopped once it started. Derek worked with Thomas's veterans, men ranging from 30 to 60, setting up overlapping zones of fire, building barricades from what was available, turning a peaceful compound into something that could withstand a siege. The work was familiar, muscle memory from deployments where staying alive meant preparing for attacks that might or might not come. Elena stayed with his children, gaining their trust incrementally. One of the boys, maybe 12 years old, name of Mateo, finally spoke more than single words. He told her about his village in Honduras, about men in trucks promising work picking fruit in America, about the journey north that became a nightmare, about being sold. He used that word specifically. Sold, like cattle, like equipment, like... When Elena asked who bought them, Mateo described men in expensive suits, Americans who spoke Spanish with gringo accents, who looked at the children like they were evaluating merchandise. He described being photographed, measured, categorized by age and appearance. He described the terror of understanding that he was property now, that his life belonged to someone who had paid money for the privilege of owning him. Elena held him while he cried, this boy who had been taught that crying made things worse, that showing emotion was weakness. She told him it was over now, that he would never be property again, that people who cared were fighting to make sure of it. She believed it when she said it. She had to believe it, because if she stopped believing, then everything she had endured, every scar on her body and soul, meant nothing. Doc found Jacob on the roof of the meeting hall as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. The old SEAL sat with his rifle across his knees, watching the road that led to the compound, waiting for the dust cloud that would signal incoming hostiles. "How is the shoulder?" "Hurts like hell," which means it is still there. "How are the kids?" "As good as can be expected. Elena is with them. She is good with them. Reminds me of Sarah, actually, your wife, the way she was with Michael when he was young." Jacob was quiet for a moment. Sarah would have liked her, would have liked all of this, in a twisted way. Fighting for something that matters, making a stand when standing costs you everything. Doc sat down next to him, grunting with the effort of lowering himself to the roof. "You know this might be it, right? Our last stand. I have been running the numbers in my head, and they do not look good." "I know. You are okay with that." Jacob looked at his friend, this man who had followed him through hell more times than either could count, who had stayed loyal when loyalty was expensive and trust was rare. I am 68 years old. My wife is dead. My son is dead. I wake up every morning wondering why I am still here. And then today, I helped rescue 7 children from slavery. I gave them a chance at a life worth living. If I die tonight making sure they keep that chance, then yes, I am okay with that. Are you? Doc laughed, the sound tired but genuine. Lord, Jacob, you always did know how to make a man face his own mortality. But yeah, I am okay with it. Gloria knows I love her. My kids know. My grandkids will remember me. And this, fighting for kids who got dealt a bad hand by adults who should have protected them, this is worth dying for. Better than a nursing home. Better than wasting away hooked to machines. This is a warrior's death. I will take it. Let us hope it does not come to that. Hope is good. Preparation is better. Tell me honestly, do you think we can pull this off? Jacob considered the question, looking out at the desert that stretched to the horizon, at the mountains beyond, at a sky turning dark as stars began to appear. Honestly, I think we have maybe a 30% chance, but those 7 kids have a 100% chance of a future if we succeed. That math works for me. Me too, brother. Me too. They sat in silence as night fell. 2 old warriors waiting for a battle that would determine not whether they lived or died, but whether their deaths would mean something. It was the only question that mattered, the only one that ever had. The attack came at 0200 hours. Not federal agents, not official anything. Private contractors, maybe 20 of them, moving with professional precision, night vision, and suppressed weapons. The kind of team that appeared on no payroll and left no witnesses. They came from 3 directions simultaneously, trying to overrun the compound before anyone could respond. They were met with defensive fire that turned the night into chaos. Thomas's veterans had fought in Fallujah, Kandahar, Mogadishu. They knew how to turn terrain into weaponry, how to make every bullet count, how to fight outnumbered and outgunned and still make the enemy pay for every inch. Jacob took position on the roof, firing controlled bursts, each round finding targets that fell and did not get up. Derek was on the south wall, working methodically, professional to professional, understanding that the men he was killing were just doing a job, but doing it anyway because the job required killing and someone had to lose. Elena guarded the building where the children were hiding, her body between them and any threat that made it through the perimeter. Doc was in the courtyard, triaging wounded, because even in combat, someone had to keep people alive. Someone had to hold the line between injury and death. One of Thomas's men took a round through the thigh, femoral artery compromised, bleeding out in seconds without intervention. Doc was there, hands moving with the speed and precision that had saved lives in 3 wars, applying pressure, clamping the artery, telling the man to hold on, that he was not dying today. The firefight lasted 30 minutes. The contractors pulled back, regrouped, tried a different approach. Grenades sailed over the walls, detonating with sharp cracks that sent shrapnel flying. One landed near Doc. He saw it, had maybe 2 seconds to make a decision, and made it without hesitation. He threw himself on top of the wounded man he was treating, using his body as a shield. The explosion lifted both of them off the ground. The man beneath Doc survived, protected by the old medic's body armor and flesh. Doc did not. The shrapnel found gaps in the armor, tore through organs that could not survive being torn, ended a life that had been spent saving others. Jacob saw it happen from the roof, saw his friend fall, saw the man Doc had been protecting crawl out from under him, alive because Doc had chosen sacrifice over survival. For a moment, everything stopped. The shooting, the tactical awareness, the mission parameters. Everything narrowed to the sight of Marcus Washington lying still in the dirt of a reservation courtyard, his war finally over. Then rage took over. Cold, pure, absolute. Jacob stood up, exposed himself to enemy fire, and began killing with the methodical efficiency of someone who had stopped caring about getting home alive. Every shot was a prayer. Every kill was justice. Every trigger pull was a promise that Doc's death would be paid for in blood, in screaming, and the absolute certainty that choosing evil had consequences. Derek saw what was happening, understood the danger, climbed to the roof, and pulled Jacob down behind cover. The old SEAL fought him, wanted to keep killing, wanted to empty every magazine into the men who had taken the last piece of his old life away. Derek held him, let him rage, waited for the fury to burn itself out into something colder and more dangerous. They killed Doc. Jacob's voice was raw. They killed him. I know, we will make them pay, but not by dying stupidly. We make them pay by finishing this, by making sure Doc's sacrifice means something. The contractors pulled back after the grenade exchange, taking their dead with them, disappearing into the darkness. They had been repulsed, but they would return. They had to. General Briggs could not afford to let anyone in the compound survive to testify. In the courtyard, Thomas's people gathered around Doc's body. The old medic looked almost peaceful, like he had simply laid down to rest after a long day. His hands were still in the position they had been in when he threw himself on the grenade, still trying to save someone. Even in death, Doc Washington was taking care of his people. They wrapped him in a blanket, said prayers in Navajo and English, promised him his sacrifice would be remembered. Jacob stood apart, unable to speak, unable to process that the man who had saved his life more times than he could count was gone, that he would never hear Doc's voice again, never share coffee and insults, never have someone who understood the weight he carried because they carried the same weight. Elena found him sitting against the wall of the meeting hall as dawn broke, staring at nothing, his rifle across his knees. She sat down beside him without speaking. Sometimes words were worse than silence. After a long time, Jacob spoke. He died saving someone. That was who he was. 40 years and he never changed. Never stopped believing that keeping people alive mattered more than anything. He was right, Elena said quietly. It does matter. Does it? We save 7 kids, lose a man worth more than all of them combined. That is not math. That is tragedy. No, Elena turned to look at him, forcing him to meet her eyes. That is what heroes do. They trade themselves for innocence. Your friend understood that. He made the choice. And now we honor it by making sure those 7 kids grow up knowing someone valued their lives enough to die for them. That is not tragedy. That is meaning. Jacob wanted to argue, wanted to say that meaning was a lie we told ourselves to make senseless death bearable. But he could not, because Doc had believed in meaning, had believed it so deeply that he gave his life for it. And calling that belief a lie would dishonor everything Doc had been. The sun rose over the desert, painting the compound in shades of gold and red, the colors of glory and blood. In the meeting hall, Thomas was making preparations for a traditional burial. Doc would be laid to rest here, on the reservation, with full honors. It was what he would have wanted. To be with warriors. To be remembered not as a victim, but as a man who chose how his story ended. By mid-morning, the preparations for the live stream were complete. Jacob had sent encrypted messages to 5 news outlets, all of them with instructions to be ready at noon Mountain Time for a broadcast that would change everything. The evidence was compiled. The testimony was ready. The 7 children, with Elena beside them, were prepared to tell their stories to the world. At 11:45, Derek pulled Jacob aside. Sir, Thomas's scouts report movement on the eastern approach. Multiple vehicles, maybe 30 men this time. They are coming heavy. How long? 20 minutes, maybe less. Jacob looked at the camera equipment, at the laptop showing connections to news servers, at the children who were about to become the most important witnesses in a case that would destroy careers and end lives. 20 minutes was not enough time to complete the broadcast, but it was enough time to start it. And once it was started, once it was live and streaming to servers around the world, stopping it would become impossible. We do it now, he said, right now. Get everyone in position. The cameras went live at 11:50. Jacob stood in front of them, shoulder bandaged, face haggard, a man who had aged 10 years in 3 days. Behind him, the 7 children and Elena. To his side, Derek in his SEAL uniform, choosing to go on record despite the cost to his career. And in the background, Thomas Begay and his veterans, men who had served America and been forgotten by it, standing as living testimony that honor still meant something to someone. Jacob looked into the camera and began to speak. My name is Jacob Hawkins. Behind me are 7 children who were trafficked across the U.S. border as cargo, sold like property, destined for slavery, or worse. They were transported in the same trucks that carried American military weapons being sold to Mexican cartels. This is not theory. This is not speculation. This is documented fact. For 5 years, General Warren Briggs has run an operation called Project Cerberus, selling billions of dollars in military equipment while using the same infrastructure to traffic human beings. My son, Captain Michael Hawkins, discovered this conspiracy. He was murdered to keep it buried. Captain James Rivera continued the investigation. He was executed. Now they are trying to kill everyone who knows, everyone who can testify, everyone who can prove what they have done. He held up a USB drive to the camera. This contains evidence, financial records, shipping manifests, photographic proof. It has been uploaded to servers that cannot be deleted or hacked. It is in the hands of journalists, prosecutors, and members of Congress who still believe in justice. You cannot bury this anymore, General Briggs. You cannot kill everyone who knows, because now everyone knows. Now, Jacob stepped aside. Let Elena bring the children forward one by one. Mateo spoke first, his voice quiet but steady, telling his story in Spanish with English subtitles provided by the streaming software. He described his village, the promises, the journey, the realization that he had been sold, the terror of months in captivity, the hope when strangers with guns came in the night and fought to free him. One by one, the children spoke. 7 voices, 7 stories, 7 lives that had been treated as commodities by men who believed power made them untouchable. The broadcast was 4 minutes in when gunfire erupted outside. The contractors had arrived earlier than expected, were assaulting the compound from multiple directions, trying to reach the meeting hall and stop the broadcast by any means necessary. Derek left the room at a run, rifle in hand. Thomas's veterans fell back to interior positions, defending not just ground but the right of these children to be heard. Jacob stayed in front of the camera, kept talking, explaining Project Cerberus in detail while bullets shredded the walls around him. Elena shielded the children, moving them behind furniture, her body between them and the doorway. The broadcast kept running. Servers around the world were receiving the stream, distributing it to news outlets, social media platforms, anywhere that would carry it. Within minutes, tens of thousands were watching. Within 10 minutes, hundreds of thousands. The conspiracy could not be contained anymore. It was light now, burning away shadows, forcing truth into spaces where lies had lived for too long. A contractor made it through the perimeter, burst into the meeting hall with rifle raised. Jacob shot him twice, center mass, dropped him before he could fire. The camera kept recording. The broadcast kept streaming. More gunfire outside, explosions, men screaming commands and orders that meant nothing in the chaos of close-quarters combat. Derek's voice came over the radio, calm despite circumstances. They are pulling back. Repeat. Hostiles are withdrawing. We have incoming friendlies. FBI helicopters, 3 of them. Someone at the bureau was watching the stream. The firefight ended as abruptly as it had started. The contractors melted away into the desert, unwilling to engage federal agents, leaving their dead behind like evidence of their failure. The FBI hostage rescue team landed in the courtyard, agents swarming out with weapons drawn, shouting commands that Jacob ignored because the broadcast was still running and he was not finished. He looked into the camera one last time. A good man died here today. Marcus Washington, Navy SEAL, combat medic. He gave his life protecting innocence because that is what warriors do. He believed in duty and honor and the idea that some things are worth dying for. He was right. This is worth dying for. These children, this truth, this fight against corruption that would turn human beings into inventory. We have given you the evidence. Now you decide. Does America still stand for something? Or are we just another country where power protects power and justice is whatever the rich say it is? You decide. The stream ended. FBI agents moved into the room, securing the scene, trying to understand what they had just walked into. Jacob sat down heavily, suddenly exhausted beyond measure, the adrenaline draining away and leaving only pain and grief and the knowledge that Doc was gone. Elena gathered the children, spoke quietly with the FBI agents, established that they were witnesses, not suspects, that they needed protection, not detention. The agents, to their credit, understood quickly. This was not a law enforcement situation anymore. This was a political earthquake, and they were standing at the epicenter. Thomas Begay stood in the doorway, looking at the damage to his compound, at the bodies being carried away, at the children who were finally, truly safe. He caught Jacob's eye and nodded once. A warrior's acknowledgement. You did what needed doing. By nightfall, the world was watching the broadcast. It had been picked up by every major news outlet, shared millions of times on social media, discussed in emergency sessions of Congress. General Warren Briggs had been taken into custody. His network was collapsing. Senators were issuing denials. Defense contractors were lawyering up. The machinery of accountability was grinding into motion. They buried Marcus Washington at sunset on a hill overlooking the desert, with full military honors and prayers in 2 languages. Jacob stood at the grave, unable to speak, unable to do anything but remember 40 years of friendship, of missions survived and promises kept. Doc had asked him once what made a life meaningful. Jacob had not had an answer then. He did now. A life was meaningful when you used it to protect people who could not protect themselves. When you stood between innocence and evil and refused to step aside even when stepping aside was easier. Doc's life had been meaningful every single day, and his death had saved 7 children and exposed a conspiracy that had destroyed countless lives. That was meaning. That was all meaning ever was, and it was enough. Elena found Jacob standing at the grave an hour after the burial, looking at the freshly turned earth, wrestling with survivor's guilt and rage and grief all tangled together into something that had no name. "He saved that boy," she said quietly. "The one he shielded. 23 years old, 2 kids at home, wife waiting for him to come back. Doc saved him, and by extension, saved his family. That is 3 more lives Doc protected. That is who he was." Jacob nodded, throat too tight for words. "Your friend told me something before the attack. Said he was glad to be part of this. Said it was better than dying of nothing. I think he meant it." He did. Doc always meant what he said. That was one of his problems. Never learned how to lie, even when lying would have made life easier. They stood together in silence, watching the last light fade from the sky, turning the desert into shades of gray and black. Tomorrow would bring interrogations, media circuses, trials and testimony, and the slow grinding work of turning truth into justice. But tonight, 2 warriors mourned a third, honoring his sacrifice the only way that mattered, by continuing the fight, by making sure his death achieved what his life had always been about, protecting people who needed protecting. The last patrol had claimed its first casualty, but it had also saved 7 lives and exposed evil that had hidden in shadows for too long. Doc Washington had traded his life for that. It was the best deal anyone could hope for. The kind of deal warriors made when they stopped counting the cost and started measuring what mattered. And what mattered was simple. Children were safe. Truth was public. Justice was possible. Everything else was just details. Doc would have approved. Washington, D.C. in autumn is a city of monuments and ghosts. The cherry trees along the tidal basin shed their leaves like soldiers shedding blood, covering the paths where tourists walk in layers of red and gold. The buildings that house the machinery of American power stand white and imposing under skies that threaten rain but never quite deliver. Inside those buildings, men in expensive suits make decisions that send young people to die in countries they cannot find on a map, then go home to comfortable beds and sleep soundly because they have convinced themselves that power and virtue are the same thing. General Warren Briggs stood at the window of his Pentagon office, looking out across the Potomac River toward Arlington Cemetery, where rows of white headstones marched in perfect formation across green hills. Somewhere in that geometric garden of the dead lay Michael Hawkins, Navy SEAL, killed in action, Syria 2019. The funeral had been Briggs' idea. Full honors, flag-draped casket, 3-volley salute. He had given the eulogy himself, talking about sacrifice and duty and the price of freedom. He had looked Jacob Hawkins in the eye and called the man's son a hero. It had not been a lie. Michael had been a hero, just not the kind that died fighting America's enemies. The kind that died because he tried to stop America from becoming one. The phone on his desk buzzed. His aide's voice came through the speaker, professional and clipped. "Sir, you have a call on the secure line. Priority 1. Briggs walked to his desk, picked up the phone that connected to numbers that did not officially exist. He already knew what the call would be about. The botched operation at the border, the stolen weapons, the team that should have been eliminated but somehow fought their way through 18 trained contractors and disappeared into the desert with enough evidence to destroy everything. Talk to me." The voice on the other end belonged to Victor Konstantin, the Russian who had handled wet work for Cerberus since the beginning. Professional, efficient, expensive, and until 3 days ago, reliable. "The situation in Arizona has escalated. Hawkins and his team hit the convoy, killed 6 of our people, and took the entire shipment. Every javelin, every stinger, all of it. They also took photographs, serial numbers, identification codes, everything we need buried. Where are they now? Phoenix, FBI field office. They walked in this morning with a truck full of stolen weapons and a story about Pentagon corruption. The special agent in charge tried to detain them. They called every news outlet in Arizona and held a press conference on the front steps. It is all over the internet. CNN picked it up 2 hours ago. Fox is running it as breaking news. Briggs felt something cold settle in his chest. Show me. Victor sent a video link. Briggs opened it on his computer. Watch the footage that was probably being watched by millions of people at that exact moment. Jacob Hawkins standing on the steps of the FBI building, arm in a sling, face like carved granite, flanked by 3 people who looked like they had just walked out of a war zone. Behind them, FBI agents standing awkwardly, unsure whether to intervene or document. In front of them, dozens of cameras, reporters shouting questions, the chaos of a story breaking in real time. Jacob's voice came through the speakers, amplified by news microphones, clear and strong despite obvious exhaustion. My name is Colonel Jacob Hawkins, United States Navy, retired. For the past 5 years, I believe my son, Captain Michael Hawkins, died serving his country in Syria. 3 days ago, I learned the truth. He was murdered, assassinated by his own command because he discovered evidence of weapons trafficking at the highest levels of military leadership. Project Cerberus, a black budget program that has funneled over $2 billion in American military technology to drug cartels, warlords, and anyone else willing to pay. The program is run by General Warren Briggs, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The evidence is behind me. Javelin missiles, Stinger systems, all of it stolen from American armories and sold to our enemies. The serial numbers match weapons reported as combat losses. The money trail leads directly to shell companies controlled by Pentagon officials. My son tried to expose this through proper channels. He was killed for it. Captain James Rivera tried to expose this. He was executed in a motel room in El Paso. I am done trusting the system to police itself. I am done believing that good men at the top will do the right thing. So I am putting all of it in front of you, the American people. You decide whether this matters. You decide whether anyone is held accountable. And if they are not, then you know exactly what kind of country we have become. The video ended. Briggs sat very still, feeling the walls closing in with the inexorability of a slow-motion avalanche. The phone was still in his hand. Victor was still waiting. What do you need me to do? Victor asked. Nothing. This is beyond your skill set now. This is a political problem. With respect, General, this could still be handled. Hawkins is wounded. His team is exhausted. I can have them eliminated before they leave FBI custody. No, Briggs said flatly. Killing them now makes them martyrs. It confirms everything they said. We need a different approach, which is discredit them, find the weaknesses. Hawkins is a retired SEAL with PTSD who lost his son and his wife in the same year. Grief made him unstable. He stole the weapons himself, staged the whole thing to get revenge for a son who died in legitimate combat. The woman Vasquez, she was dishonorably discharged for psychological issues. Cole is under investigation for unauthorized absence. We control the narrative. We make them look like conspiracy theorists who went rogue. By tomorrow, half the country will think they are unhinged veterans, and the other half will not know what to believe. And the evidence? Chain of custody is broken the moment they drove those weapons off a border ambush site. Any half-competent defense attorney will argue tampering. We audit the serial numbers, discover that some do not match official records because Hawkins altered them. We create enough doubt that the investigation stalls. Meanwhile, we quietly retire a few people, reassign others, let the paper trail go cold. In 6 months, this is a footnote. In a year, it is forgotten. Victor was silent for a moment. You have done this before, many times. Scandals only destroy you if you let them. If you control the response, you control the outcome. Understood. I will stand by for further instructions. The call ended. Briggs set the phone down carefully, his mind already working through the sequence of moves required to survive this. He had not built a career spanning 4 decades by panicking when things went wrong. He had built it by being smarter and more ruthless than everyone else in the room. His next call was to Senator Blake Hardwick, chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, a man who had received campaign contributions from the same shell companies that funneled Cerberus money. Hardwick answered on the first ring. Warren, I just saw the news. Please tell me this is not real. It is a fabrication by a disturbed veteran seeking revenge for his son's death. We are already preparing our response. The evidence looked pretty damning. The evidence is stolen weapons with broken chain of custody being presented by people with obvious credibility issues. We spin this right, it goes away. You better hope so, because if this turns into a real investigation, a lot of people go down, including me, including you. It will not. Trust me, Blake, I have handled worse than this. The conversation continued for 10 minutes. Briggs reassuring, cajoling, reminding Hardwick of all the favors owed and collected. By the end, the senator was convinced, or at least convinced enough to start making his own calls, spreading the narrative, controlling the damage. Briggs made 6 more calls in the next hour. Defense contractors who had benefited from Cerberus, intelligence officials who had looked the other way, media contacts who owed him exclusives. By noon, the counter-narrative was taking shape. By evening, it would be competing with Hawkins' version on cable news. By tomorrow, polls would show Americans divided along predictable lines about who to believe. But there was one problem, one element Briggs could not control through spin and favors and media management. Jacob Hawkins himself. The man was a decorated war hero, 3 tours Vietnam, Silver Star, Bronze Star with VE device, the kind of resume that made him difficult to dismiss as a crank. And more importantly, he had the moral authority of a father seeking justice for a murdered son. That played well on television. That made people listen. Briggs needed to neutralize that authority, and there was only one way to do it. He made one final call, this one to a number that connected to an office in Langley, where people with security clearances signed documents swearing they would never discuss what they knew. The man who answered did not give his name. I need a file. Everything you have on Jacob Hawkins, medical records, psychological evaluations, classified after action reports. Anything that makes him look unstable, unreliable, or compromised. That is a lot to ask, General. Those files are protected. So is $2 billion in defense spending that benefits your operations budget. Make the files available or lose that funding. Your choice. The line went dead. 30 minutes later, an encrypted email arrived with attachments that would have ended Hawkins' career if they had been released 20 years ago. PTSD diagnoses, violent incidents during training, questions about mission conduct in Somalia. Not enough to prosecute, but enough to create doubt. Enough to make a jury wonder if maybe this man was not a reliable narrator of his own story. Briggs forwarded the files to his media contacts with a note. Deep background, attribution to anonymous Pentagon source. Paint him as unstable. By tonight's news cycle. Then he sat back and waited for the machinery of information warfare to do what it did best. Destroy reputations and manufacture consent. 300 miles away in Phoenix, Jacob Hawkins sat in an FBI interview room that smelled like coffee and desperation. His shoulder throbbed despite the painkillers. His head ached from too many hours without sleep. Across the table, 2 FBI agents took turns asking questions they already knew the answers to because everything had been recorded, photographed, and documented. Derek and Elena were in separate rooms undergoing their own interrogations. Doc was at a hospital under FBI guard, recovering from exhaustion and dehydration. The weapons were in an evidence locker, tagged and cataloged, already the subject of heated discussions between FBI, DOD, and Justice Department officials about jurisdiction and procedure. The interview had been going for 4 hours when Special Agent Reeves, the lead investigator, leaned forward with an expression that was not quite sympathy and not quite accusation. Colonel Hawkins, I want to believe you, I really do. But you have to understand how this looks. You steal weapons from a cartel convoy, claim they are evidence of Pentagon corruption, and expect us to just take your word for it? The serial numbers match weapons reported as combat losses by units under General Briggs' command. The financial records show shell companies receiving Pentagon contracts and making payments to cartel intermediaries. The testimony of Captain Rivera, before he was murdered, lays it all out. What more do you need? Chain of custody, Reeves said. Those weapons were in cartel hands for unknown duration. You took them in an unauthorized military action on foreign soil. Any evidence derived from them illegally questionable at best. So you are saying if we had followed proper procedure, filed reports through official channels, waited for the system to investigate itself, then the evidence would be admissible? Is that your position? That is how the law works. The law failed my son. The law failed James Rivera. The law is failing every American who believes their military is not for sale to the highest bidder. So forgive me if I do not have a lot of faith in proper procedure right now. Reeves sat back, exchanged a glance with his partner. Look, Colonel, between us, I think you might be right about some of this. But thinking it and proving it are different things. And right now, all I can prove is that you assaulted a cartel convoy, stole military weapons, and transported them across state lines. That is 20 years in federal prison. Then charge me, Jacob said flatly. Do it right now. Put me in front of a jury and let me tell them why I did it. Let me explain in open court about Project Cerberus and General Briggs and how the Pentagon has been selling weapons to cartels for 5 years. I will welcome that trial because it is the only way this story stays public. The room went silent. Reeves understood the trap. Charging Hawkins meant a trial. A trial meant testimony. Testimony meant all the evidence, questionable or not, entering the public record. It meant months of news coverage, congressional hearings, political pressure. It meant exactly what Briggs and his network were trying to prevent. Let me talk to my superiors, Reeves finally said. He left the room. Jacob sat alone under fluorescent lights that hummed with the frequency of insect wings, thinking about Michael, about the last conversation they had before the deployment that killed him, thinking about Sarah, about the promise he had made at her grave to take care of their son, to make sure his sacrifice meant something, thinking about Doc, who had followed him into hell one more time because friendship mattered more than common sense. The door opened. Not Reeves, a woman in her 50s, gray suit, no-nonsense expression, the bearing of someone who had spent a career navigating bureaucracy and power. She sat down across from Jacob without offering her name. Colonel Hawkins, I am here on behalf of the Department of Justice. We have a proposal. I am not interested in deals. Hear me out. We drop all charges against you and your team. We initiate a full investigation into the weapons trafficking allegations. Independent prosecutor, unlimited resources, full authority to follow evidence wherever it leads. And in exchange, you go home. You stop talking to the media. You let us handle this through proper channels. Jacob laughed, the sound bitter. You want me to trust the system after everything that has happened? What I want is to actually prosecute the people responsible instead of watching them walk because a defense attorney shreds your evidence as fruit of the poisonous tree. You did your part. You got the evidence. Now let professionals with subpoena power and grand juries do theirs. How do I know this is not another cover-up? You do not. But you have already forced our hand. The story is public. Congress is calling for hearings. The Inspector General has launched a review. You won. We have to investigate now or look complicit. So the question is whether you want to be part of the solution or part of the problem. Jacob studied her face, looking for deception, finding only pragmatism. She was right about one thing. The evidence he had gathered, however compelling, was legally compromised. A good defense team would tear it apart. But if the FBI and DOJ used it as a starting point, used their legal authority to seize records and compel testimony, they could build a case that would hold up in court. I want updates, weekly reports on the investigation progress. And if I see any signs of a cover-up, any indication that you are slow-walking this, I go back to the media and tell them everything. The woman nodded. Fair enough. Do we have a deal? Jacob thought about Michael, about whether his son would approve of this compromise. Decided that Michael would want justice more than he would want revenge, would want the guilty punished more than he would want his father to die tilting at windmills. We have a deal. The woman stood, shook his hand with a grip that was surprisingly strong. For what it is worth, Colonel, my nephew died in Afghanistan, IED made from American explosives that were supposed to be secured, but somehow ended up in insurgent hands. If your allegations are true, if people at the Pentagon have been trafficking weapons, then I want them in prison even more than you do. She left. 2 hours later, Jacob was released. Derek and Elena emerged from their own interrogations looking exhausted but intact. They collected Doc from the hospital, signed paperwork that included non-disclosure agreements and witness protection protocols, and walked out of the FBI building into autumn sunlight that felt like redemption. The media was still camped outside. Cameras tracked their movement. Reporters shouted questions. Jacob said nothing, just got into the truck and drove away, leaving Phoenix in the rearview mirror, along with the evidence he had bled for and the hope that maybe, just maybe, the system would do the right thing. They drove north, back toward Montana, not speaking much because words felt inadequate for what they had accomplished and survived. Doc dozed in the back seat, exhausted beyond measure. Elena stared out the window at landscape that blurred past. Derek drove with the careful precision of someone who had learned that after the mission comes the hardest part, living with what you did to complete it. They were 200 miles north of Phoenix when Derek's phone rang. He checked the caller ID, frowned, answered. "Cole here." The voice on the other end made Derek's face go white. He listened for 30 seconds, said nothing, ended the call, pulled the truck to the shoulder, and sat gripping the steering wheel with hands that trembled. "What is it?" Jacob asked. Derek turned to look at him, eyes hollow. "That was my commanding officer. I have been ordered to report to Naval Base Coronado immediately. They are charging me with unauthorized absence, theft of government property, and conspiracy to commit treason." "Treason?" "They are saying I colluded with you to steal classified weapons and frame a senior military officer. They have evidence. Emails they claim I sent to cartel contacts. Bank transfers to accounts in my name. It is all fabricated, but it looks real. They are going to court-martial me." The truck went silent. Jacob felt rage building in his chest, cold and precise. Briggs was not going to let this go. He was going to destroy them one by one, using the system itself as a weapon. Derek first because he was still active duty and vulnerable. Then probably Elena, digging up issues from her medical discharge. Maybe even Doc, claiming he aided and abetted. And Jacob himself they would paint as a mentally unstable veteran who manufactured evidence to justify a personal vendetta. "We knew this might happen," Jacob said quietly. "We knew they would fight back. Knowing it and living it are different things, sir. If I go back, they will lock me up and throw away the key. If I do not go back, I am a fugitive. Either way, my career is over." "Your career is over," Jacob agreed. "But your life is not, and neither is this fight." "What are you saying?" "I am saying we do not go home. We do not wait for the FBI to investigate. We do not trust the system to deliver justice. We go to Washington, we walk into the Pentagon, and we make General Briggs confess in front of the world." Elena leaned forward from the back seat. "That is insane. The Pentagon has more security than Fort Knox. We would never get past the lobby." "We do not need to get it past the lobby. We just need to get to Briggs. And I know how to do that." "How?" "Because I know something about Briggs that he thinks I do not know. Something that will make him meet with us. Face to face, no security, no backup, just him and us and the truth." Doc opened his eyes, looked at Jacob with an expression of weary resignation. "Please tell me you are not about to suggest something that will get us all killed." "Probably. But it is better than letting them destroy us from a distance. And it is sure as hell better than letting Briggs win." They drove through the night, heading east now instead of north, toward Washington instead of Montana. Somewhere behind them, warrants were being issued, charges were being filed, the machinery of military justice grinding into motion to crush 4 people who had dared to challenge power. Somewhere ahead, a 4-star general sat in his office, convinced that he had won, that spin and lawyers and institutional inertia would protect him the way they always had. But General Warren Briggs had made one critical error. He had underestimated what a father would do to honor his son's memory. He had underestimated what old warriors would risk when they stopped caring whether they survived. He had underestimated the power of people who had nothing left to lose. And that error was about to cost him everything. Washington, D.C. in autumn is a city of monuments and ghosts. The monuments honor the dead who served. The ghosts are the living who betrayed them. Soon one of those ghosts would be forced to confront what he had become, forced to answer for Michael Hawkins and James Rivera and all the others whose lives were traded for money and power and the illusion of security. The last patrol was entering its final phase, and this time there would be no retreat, no escape, no mercy. Just a reckoning 40 years in the making, delivered by men and women who remembered when honor meant something more than a word in speeches and duty meant something more than following orders. They drove into dawn with the Capitol waiting ahead, a city of white marble and dark secrets, where justice was supposed to live but rarely did, where truth was supposed to matter but usually did not, where power protected power and the price was always paid by someone else. But not this time, not anymore. This time the bill was coming due, and General Warren Briggs was going to pay it in full. The truck rolled on through the morning light, carrying four people who had become something more than soldiers or veterans or citizens seeking redress. They had become the reckoning itself, the consequence. The moment when all the lies and cover-ups and moral compromises came home to roost in the form of a 68-year-old SEAL with a wounded shoulder and a promise to keep. Ahead, the monuments of Washington rose against the sky. Behind, the bodies and the blood and the evidence of corruption stretching back years. Between four people who would finish this one way or another because walking away was no longer an option and surrender had never been in their vocabulary. The last patrol had one final mission, and failure was not part of the plan. Arlington National Cemetery is where America buries its promises. Row after row of white marble headstones march across green hills in formation so perfect it looks like the dead are still standing at attention, waiting for orders that will never come. Each stone marks a life given in service, a family broken by duty, a story that ends the same way all soldier stories end, with earth and flags and the 21-gun salute that sounds like thunder echoing across eternity. Jacob Hawkins stood between two graves in the gray light of dawn, reading inscriptions he had memorized long ago. On his left, Captain Michael James Hawkins, United States Navy SEAL, born March 15, 1985, died October 7, 2019. Beloved son, faithful warrior, honored in death as in life. On his right, a newer stone, marble still bright white, earth not yet settled. Senior Chief Marcus Washington, United States Navy SEAL, born February 12, 1959, died November 3, 2025. He saved more lives than he took. That was his pride. The inscription on Doc's stone had been Jacob's choice. Gloria had approved through tears, saying it was perfect, saying Marcus would have loved it. The funeral had been 3 weeks ago, full honors, hundreds of veterans in attendance, a ceremony that celebrated a life spent in service to others. Jacob had been unable to speak at it. The words had refused to come. How do you summarize 40 years of friendship in a eulogy? How do you explain what it meant to have someone who would follow you into hell, not because they had to, but because that was what brothers did? The sunrise painted the monuments of Washington in shades of gold and red, the colors of glory and blood. Somewhere in this city, General Warren Briggs sat in a federal holding facility, awaiting trial on 17 counts of conspiracy, weapons trafficking, and human trafficking. His legal team was the best money could buy, but money could not erase live-stream testimony from 7 children or financial records uploaded to servers around the world, or photographs showing him shaking hands with cartel intermediaries. Jacob did not care about the trial anymore. He cared about 2 stones in Arlington and the men beneath them. His son, who had tried to do the right thing and been murdered for it. His friend, who had died making sure children lived. Both of them heroes in the truest sense. Both of them buried here while men who had betrayed everything the uniform stood for walked free on bail and prepared their defenses. Derek stood 20 feet away, giving Jacob space but staying close enough to intervene if grief became something that required intervention. Elena was at the cemetery entrance, watching the road, old habits from when they had been fugitives instead of witnesses, when every car could contain threats instead of just tourists and morning commuters. Jacob touched both stones, cold marble that held the names of men he had loved. I kept my promise, Michael. Briggs is facing justice. The truth is public. Your death matters. And Doc, I should have been the one. Should have been me on that grenade. You had Gloria. You had grandkids. You had reasons to live. I had nothing left but this mission. It should have been me. But that was the thing about sacrifice. You did not get to choose who made it. Doc had made his choice in a split second, throwing himself on a grenade to protect a wounded man, ending his life the way he had lived it, saving people. That was who Marcus Washington had been, from the day Jacob met him to the day he died. A man who believed that keeping people alive was the highest calling a warrior could answer. Jacob straightened, turned away from the graves, walked back to where his team waited. They did not speak. There was nothing left to say that had not been said in the 3 weeks since the reservation firefight, in the endless interviews with FBI and DOJ, in the congressional hearings where they had testified about Project Cerberus and watched powerful men squirm under oath. They drove from Arlington to the Pentagon in morning traffic, just another vehicle in a river of cars carrying people to chase in the machinery of American power. But today was different. Today was the day Jacob Hawkins would walk into the office of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and force a confession that would end the last shred of deniability Briggs's legal team was clinging to. The plan was simple, the way desperation is always simple. They would confront Briggs, record the conversation, live stream it to news outlets the same way they had live streamed the children's testimony, force him to either confess or lie in a way that could be cross-referenced with evidence already public, give him enough rope to hang himself with and see if he was smart enough not to use it. The leverage Jacob had was still potent. The photograph from Dubai showing Briggs with his secret daughter, the girl who was now 18, still living in luxury paid for by Cerberus funds, still unaware that her father was about to become the most hated man in America. Jacob had kept that photograph private, honoring the deal he had made with himself. He would use it only if Briggs refused to confess, only if there was no other way to ensure justice. But he hoped it would not come to that, because destroying an innocent girl's life, even to punish her guilty father, was a price Jacob was not sure he was willing to pay. Doc would have told him that some prices were too high, that becoming monsters to fight monsters made the victory meaningless. Jacob could hear his friend's voice in his head, calm and certain, the way it had always been when Jacob's rage threatened to overwhelm his judgment. Derek drove, Elena in the passenger seat, Jacob in the back reviewing the plan one more time. They had visitor badges obtained through the same Pentagon contact who had helped them before, a man who owed Jacob favors and believed that Briggs deserved whatever was coming to him. The badges would get them through security. After that, it was just walking to an office and forcing a conversation that would end a career or end them. Maybe both. They passed through checkpoints, armed guards, scanners that could detect weapons through clothing. They carried no guns. This was not that kind of operation. This was psychological warfare, the kind that used truth as ammunition and shame as a weapon, the kind that required nothing but courage and the willingness to burn bridges you could never rebuild. The Pentagon is designed to confuse, but Jacob had walked these corridors enough to navigate them by memory. 5 concentric rings, 18 miles of hallways. A geometric puzzle that defeated visitors but was home to anyone who had worked here. They took service corridors that cleaning staff used, routes that bypassed main reception areas, paths that brought them to Briggs's office without setting off alarms or raising questions. The door was closed. Jacob did not knock. He pushed it open and walked inside, Elena and Derek following, spreading out to cover the room with automatic spacing that came from muscle memory rather than thought. General Warren Briggs looked up from his desk, surprise registering on his face before training and experience smoothed it away. He was in civilian clothes, pending trial not requiring uniform, but his bearing was still military, still commanding, still convinced of his own authority despite the charges hanging over him. Colonel Hawkins, I should have known you would not stay away, breaking into the Pentagon again. You are making a habit of criminal behavior. I learned from the best, Jacob said flatly. You made a career of breaking laws and calling it national security. I made a career of protecting American interests in a world that does not play by rules. You would not understand. You are a field operator. You follow orders. You do not make the hard choices that keep this country safe. Like trafficking children? That was a hard choice for national security? Collateral damage in a larger operation, regrettable but necessary. Jacob felt rage building in his chest, cold and precise. There is nothing regrettable about you. Nothing that deserves regret. You are just evil dressed up in stars and speeches. Briggs stood slowly, moving with deliberate calm. You broke into my office. You are recording this conversation without my consent. Nothing you capture here will be admissible in court. My lawyers will tear it apart. So what exactly do you think you are accomplishing? Jacob pulled out his phone, showed Briggs the live stream app, the 5 news outlets connected and waiting, the start button that would broadcast their conversation to the world. I am not trying to admissible evidence. I am trying for public record, for the court of opinion, for every American watching at home to see you defend child trafficking and weapons sales to cartels. You can lie to lawyers and judges. Let us see if you can lie to everyone. Briggs's face went from confident to calculating in the span of a heartbeat. You are bluffing. You press that button, I call security, This stream gets shut down before it means anything. Maybe, but it will be out there, on servers, being copied and shared. You cannot delete the internet, General. You cannot bury the truth anymore. The room was silent except for the hum of ventilation and the distant sound of voices in the corridor outside. Briggs looked at Jacob with an expression that contained recognition, one predator acknowledging another. Then he smiled, cold and empty. You want a confession? Fine, I will give you one. But first I want to explain something. You think I am a monster. You think I sold out my country for money. You are wrong. I own weapons to maintain American power. Every javelin in cartel hands is a javelin that destabilizes Mexico. Every stinger going to warlords is leverage we can use later. You want to call that trafficking? I call it strategy, long-term thinking, the kind that wins wars. And the children? What do you call that? A mistake, Briggs said flatly. An element of the operation I did not personally control or approve. Contractors exceeded their authority. When I found out, it was already too late to stop without exposing the entire program. So you let it continue. You let children be sold because stopping it was inconvenient. I made a calculation. 7 children against the strategic interests of the United States, against the stability that comes from keeping our southern border in chaos, against the defense contracts that fund the military. Yes, I made that calculation, and I would make it again. Jacob felt something break inside him, some last hope that maybe Briggs had a shred of humanity left, some piece of soul that recognized what he had become. But there was nothing. Just a man who had traded morality for power so long ago, he could not remember what morality felt like. Jacob pressed start on the live stream. The app showed connections forming, viewers joining, news servers receiving the feed. Within seconds, thousands were watching. Within a minute, tens of thousands. State your name for the record. Briggs realized what had happened, reached for his phone to call security. Derek was faster, removing it from the desk, stepping back out of reach. Elena moved to block the door. This conversation was going to happen whether Briggs wanted it or not. General Warren Briggs, United States Army, and you just committed about 15 federal crimes. Tell them what you did. I ran a black budget operation that sold military equipment to non-state actors as part of a broader strategic initiative to maintain American influence in unstable regions. Children were not part of the plan. That was contractor overreach. You knew about it. You let it continue. That makes you responsible. In the real world, Colonel, responsibility is measured by results. My results include 5 years of successful operations that strengthened American strategic position. Your results include dead operators and a self-righteous crusade that will weaken our national security for a generation. My son was one of those dead operators. You had him murdered. Your son was collateral damage in a necessary operation. I am sorry for your loss, but individual lives do not outweigh national interests. Jacob stepped closer, voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. You know what your problem is, General. You think you are the hero of this story. You think history will vindicate you. But history is written by people who remember. And everyone watching this broadcast right now will remember you as the man who trafficked children and called it strategy, as the man who murdered a Navy SEAL and called it collateral damage. That is your legacy. That is all you will ever be. Briggs met his eyes without flinching. Then we are both monsters, Colonel. You are just too self-righteous to admit it. How many people did you kill over your career? How many missions did you complete that ended with body counts? You think wearing the flag makes you different from me? We are the same. We just serve different masters. No, Jacob said quietly. We are not the same. I killed enemies in combat. You killed your own people to hide corruption. I served honor. You served yourself. And the difference between us is that I can live with what I did. You are going to die in prison remembering what you became. The door burst open. Armed security, half a dozen of them, weapons drawn. The live stream was still running, still broadcasting, showing federal agents taking control of the situation. Briggs was placed in handcuffs, his immunity from arrest pending trial revoked in real time by prosecutors who had just watched him admit to knowing about child trafficking and letting it continue. Jacob raised his hands slowly, allowed himself to be searched and secured. The stream continued for another minute, showing the aftermath, the consequences, the moment when power finally faced accountability. Then it ended. The connection lost as security confiscated equipment. But it had been enough. The confession was public. The admission of guilt was recorded. Briggs had destroyed himself with his own words, his own arrogance, his own certainty that he could justify anything if he framed it as national security. They were separated again, different holding rooms, different interrogators. But this time was different. This time they were not suspects. They were witnesses who had just delivered a confession that no lawyer could spin, no PR team could manage. The case against Briggs had gone from strong to airtight in the span of one live stream conversation. The trial lasted 3 months. Briggs pleaded guilty to avoid death penalty, accepting life in prison without possibility of parole. His testimony brought down a senator, a defense contractor CEO, and half a dozen mid-level Pentagon officials. Project Cerberus was dismantled. New oversight regulations were implemented. The scandal became a case study in what happens when warriors confuse strategy with morality. The 7 children were placed in protective custody, their identities sealed, their futures guaranteed by a settlement fund that came from seized Cerberus assets. Mateo wrote Jacob a letter 6 months later in careful English, thanking him for saving his life and telling him he wanted to be a teacher someday, to help other kids who got lost. Jacob kept that letter, read it when the nightmares got too bad, when the weight of what he had sacrificed threatened to overwhelm him. Derek was honorably discharged from the Navy, the court-martial charges dropped, his record noting extraordinary service under difficult circumstances. He took a position training special operations units, teaching young operators about moral courage and when to question orders. He used Michael's story as a case study. He never stopped visiting Michael's grave, never stopped feeling the weight of survivors' guilt, but he learned to carry it the way Jacob carried his, as proof that surviving meant something when you use that survival to honor the dead. Elena joined the FBI 2 years after the trial. Her application had been rejected twice before someone at the Bureau decided that a woman who had fought corruption at gunpoint might be exactly the kind of agent they needed. She worked organized crime, specifically human trafficking, specifically saving children. She was good at it, better than good. She told people she was motivated by duty. The truth was, she was motivated by Doc Washington's memory, by a man who died shielding innocence, by the belief that some things were worth any sacrifice. Jacob lived until he was 76 years old. Cancer, the same kind that had taken Sarah. He refused treatment. He had done what he needed to do. He had kept his promises. He was ready for whatever came next. Doc and Michael were waiting. He believed that, had to believe it, because the alternative was that all the sacrifice and pain and death meant nothing, led nowhere, ended in darkness. On his last day in a hospital room with mountains visible through the window, he asked Elena to bring him something from his cabin. A compass, old brass, probably worth nothing to anyone but him. He held it in hands that shook worse than ever, looked at the needle pointing north the way it always had, reliable and true regardless of the chaos around it. Principles survive when everything else fails, he said to Elena. Technology breaks, systems fail, but if you know which direction is north, you can always find your way home. This was Doc's. He gave it to me after we dragged each other out of Mogadishu. Said I needed to remember that some things stay true even when the world goes crazy. Now I am giving it to you. Keep fighting. Keep pointing north. Elena took the compass. She did not cry. Neither did he. Warriors do not cry at endings. They salute and move forward and carry the memories of fallen friends like banners into battles yet to come. That night, Jacob Hawkins died in his sleep. The hospital noted the time as 0300 hours, the same time he had gone on missions for 40 years. The same time warriors wake and prepare for whatever the day brings. It seemed fitting. Everything about his life had been fitting. Born in duty, lived in service, died after ensuring that service meant something. They buried him at Arlington with full military honors. 3-volley salute, flag folded into triangles, taps played by a bugler who had played it 10,000 times and still managed to make it sound like grief and glory combined. They buried him next to Michael, next to Doc, 3 warriors together in the only way left to them. The headstone read what Jacob had requested. He finished his last patrol. That was all he wanted to be remembered for. That and the children he saved. That and the friend who died beside him. That and the son whose memory drove everything. Elena stood at the grave with Derek beside her, both of them in their dress uniforms, both of them carrying the weight of survival and the responsibility that came with it. The funeral ended. The crowd dispersed. The cemetery returned to its eternal silence, broken only by wind through the trees and the distant sound of traffic on highways that connected this place to a world that kept moving forward, regardless of who fell. Elena placed the compass on Jacob's grave for a moment, letting it rest against marble, still bright and clean. Then she picked it up, put it in her pocket. The compass was not meant to stay on graves. It was meant to be carried, to be used, to point north when direction was lost and true north seemed impossible to find. She left Arlington as the sun set, turning the monuments gold, casting long shadows that looked like ghosts. Derek walked with her in silence, both of them understanding that something had ended, but something else had begun. The mission continued. The fight went on, because that was what Jacob and Michael and Doc had taught them. That warriors do not quit. That principles matter more than comfort. That sometimes the only way to honor the dead is to keep living in a way that makes their sacrifice worth it. Washington, D.C. in autumn is a city of monuments and ghosts. But sometimes, very rarely, it is also a city where justice happens, where the powerful fall and the principled win, and the long arc of history bends just slightly towards something better. Jacob Hawkins had bent that arc. Not through politics or compromise or any of the traditional paths. He had bent it through violence when violence was necessary, through truth when truth was all he had, through the stubborn refusal to accept that corruption was just how things worked. That was his legacy, not the medals or the missions or the years of service. His legacy was proving that one man, if he cared enough and fought hard enough and was willing to pay any price, could still change the world, could still matter in a system that insisted individual action was meaningless, could still stand for something when everyone around him chose to sit down. 1 year after Jacob's death, a monument was erected at the Navajo Reservation outside Shiprock. Simple, just a stone with names carved into it. Michael Hawkins, Marcus Washington, Jacob Hawkins. Beneath their names, a single line. They stood between children and evil. That was enough. Thomas Begay maintained that monument, kept the area clean, told the story to anyone who asked. About the night warriors came to protect the innocent, about the key of that protection, about sacrifice that meant more than survival. The children who had been saved visited sometimes, when they were old enough to understand what had happened, when they needed to remember that people had valued their lives enough to die for them. Mateo was one of them, 20 years old now, in college, studying to be a teacher like he had written in his letter to Jacob. He stood at the monument on the anniversary of the firefight, looking at the names, remembering faces he could barely recall, feeling the weight of debt that could never be repaid. Elena found him there at sunset. She came every year on the anniversary to remember and honor and promise that the fight continued. She showed Mateo the compass, let him hold it, explained what it meant. Your life mattered to them, she said, more than their own. That is what heroes do. They make that choice. And now you get to make choices too. What kind of man you become, how you use the time they gave you, whether their sacrifice means something. Mateo nodded, handed back the compass. I will not waste it, I promise. Then they already won. The sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, the colors of sacrifice and glory. Somewhere a new generation of warriors was preparing for battles yet to come. Somewhere corruption was finding new ways to hide. Somewhere innocence needed protecting. The mission never ended. It just found new soldiers to carry it forward. Elena looked at the compass in her hand, needle pointing north, steady and true. Doc had given it to Jacob. Jacob had given it to her.
Ready when you are.
Someday she would pass it to someone else. Someone who needed to remember that principles survived when everything else failed.
Confirmed.
That honor
Ready
was
when you
not a
are.
word, but a choice made every day in small moments and large ones. The last patrol had ended. The warriors had fallen.
Confirmed. Ready
But
when
the
you
war
are.
went on because it always did. And somewhere new warriors were picking up the compass and checking which direction was north
Confirmed.
and
Ready when
preparing
you
to
are.
fight the fights that needed fighting. That was enough. That had to be enough. Because in the end, it was all anyone could do. Point toward true north, march towards it, die trying if necessary, and trust that someone would pick up the compass when you fell and keep marching. Jacob Hawkins had done that. Marcus Washington had done that. Michael Hawkins had done that. Now it was Elena's turn, Derek's turn, Mateo's turn, the turns of everyone who believed that some things were worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth living for. The compass pointed north. It always would, as long as someone carried it, as long as someone remembered what it stood for, as long as warriors existed who chose principle over survival and honor over safety. The last patrol was over, but the mission continued, forever and always, until the day came when compasses were no longer needed because everyone knew which direction was north without being shown. Until that day, warriors would keep walking, keep fighting, keep standing between the innocent and those who would harm them. That was the promise. That was the mission. That was what Jacob Hawkins had lived for and died for and left behind as legacy. Mission complete, honor satisfied, warrior rested. And somewhere in the darkness, three men who had paid the price smiled, knowing that what they started would not end, knowing that the compass would keep pointing north long after they were dust, knowing that they had mattered in the only way that ever truly mattered. They had stood when standing was hard. They had fought when fighting was costly. They had loved in a way that transcended life and death. That was enough. That was everything. Rest well, warriors. Your watch is ended, your mission complete, your legacy secure. The compass points north. The march continues. The fight goes on. Forever and always. Until the mission is won,